In the Grand Crown Hotel of Dannemouth, a wealthy tyrant, Charles Grayson, is poisoned in his locked suite, his brandy laced with cyanide. His quiet wife, Eleanor, stands accused, but the evidence is too perfect. Enter Miss Marple, the unassuming, spinster with a razor-sharp mind, summoned to unravel the truth. As she navigates the hotel's opulent halls, she uncovers a web of grudges among the staffer, humiliated waiter, a secretive porter, a trembling maid. With a cunning trap, she exposes the killer, proving Eleanor's innocence in a tale of betrayal. And vengeance? Will you follow the clues to the shocking truth? Chapter 1. The summons the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the village of St. Mary Mead, its rays slipping through the delicate lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's modest cottage. The parlour was a picture of quiet order. A polished walnut table held a vase of freshly cut roses, their scent mingling with the faint aroma of lavender polish. Miss Marple sat in her favourite chintz armchair, her nimble fingers guiding knitting needles through the soft loops of pale blue wool, crafting a scarf destined for a nephew's Christmas parcel. The rhythmic click of the needles was the only sound, save for the distant trill of a black bird in the garden. She was contemplating the merits of a cable stitch, when a sharp rap at the door broke her reverie. Miss Marple's eyes, bright and bird-like behind her spectacles, flicked toward the clock on the mantelpiece. 4:30. An unusual hour for visitors, she noted, setting her knitting aside. She rose, smoothing her neat grey skirt, and opened the door to find young Tommy, the postman's lad, clutching a single letter. His freckled face was flushed from his bicycle ride up the lane. "For you, Miss Marple," he said, touching his cap. "From Dannemouth. Looks important." "Thank you, Tommy," she replied, her voice gentle but with a hint of curiosity. She took the envelope, noting its crisp cream paper and the embossed crest of the Crown Hotel, a place she knew by reputation as one of the grander establishments on the coast. Closing the door, she returned to her armchair and slit the envelope. With a silver letter opener, her movements precise. The letter was from Colonel Arthur Bantry, an old friend whose bluffed military manner belied a shrewd mind. Now a magistrate in Dannemouth, he wrote in a hurried hand, "My dear Jane, I find myself in a devil of a fix and thought of you at once. A nasty business at the Crown Hotel. A woman, Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, stands accused of poisoning her husband, Charles Grayson. The police are convinced she's guilty, but something about the case doesn't sit right with me. The evidence is too tidy, if you take my meaning. I remember your knack for seeing through the fog of human nature, and I'd be grateful if you could come at once. Your old room at the Crown is reserved. Train leaves St. Mary Mead at 6:15 p.m. Yours in haste." Arthur Bantry. Miss Marple folded the letter, her lips pursing slightly. Murder, she reflected, was like a poorly darned sequin. Loose thread could unravel the entire pattern. She had known Arthur Bantry since his days as a young officer, when he and his wife Dolly had dined at her cottage and laughed over village gossip. If Arthur was troubled, there was reason to take notice. Her gaze drifted to the roses on the table, their petals soft as secrets. "Poison," she murmured, "such an intimate choice." With characteristic efficiency, she rose and climbed the narrow staircase to her bedroom. From the wardrobe, she selected a sensible black dress, a woolen cardigan, and her best hatter, modest affair with a single velvet ribbon. She packed these, along with her knitting and a well-worn copy of The Vicar of Wakefield, into a small leather suitcase. A glance at the clock confirmed she had just enough time to catch the evening train. As she locked the cottage door, her neighbour, Mrs. Price, peered over the garden hedge, her eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Off on a trip, Miss Marple?" "A short visit to Danimouth," Miss Marple replied, her smile polite but unyielding. "To see an old friend." Mrs. Price nodded, clearly hoping for more, but Miss Marple stepped briskly down the path, her suitcase swinging lightly. The village was stirring into evening, with children playing in the lane and the scent of baking bread wafting from the bakery. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts were already elsewhere, turning over Arthur's words. A woman accused, a husband dead, and evidence to tidy. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a grocer's wife had been wrongly blamed for theft, because the truth was inconveniently complexed. At the station, she purchased a ticket and settled onto a bench, her hands folded in her lap. The platform was quiet, save for a porter whistling a tune and the distant huff of the approaching train. Miss Marple's mind sifted through possibilities. Poison required planning, access, and motive. A wife might have all three, but so might others. Hotels, she knew, were like villages full of unseen currents, grudges, and alliances. The train pulled in, its steam curling into the dusk, and she boarded, choosing a corner seat in a second-class carriage. As the countryside rolled past, Miss Marple opened her knitting bag, but her needles remained still. Her eyes, sharp as ever, stared unseeing at the darkening fields. "Arthur is right," she thought. "Something is amiss, and I shall find it." The train rattled on toward Danimouth, carrying her toward a puzzle that, like her knitting, would require patience to untangle. Chapter 2. The Crown Hotel. The train from St. Mary Mead pulled into Danimouth station just as the clock tower struck 9, its chimes swallowed by the salty breeze rolling in from the sea. Miss Jane Marple stepped onto the platform, her small suitcase in hand, and inhaled the briny air. The night was cool, the sky a velvet canopy pricked with stars, and the station bustled with porters and late arrivals. She spotted a familiar figure at once, Colonel Arthur Bantry, his military bearing unmistakable despite the years that had softened his frame. His tweed coat was slightly rumpled, and his mustache twitched with a mix of relief and agitation as he hurried toward her. "Jane, you're a godsend," he said, taking her suitcase with a gallant nod. "I knew you'd come. The car's just outside." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling behind her spectacles. "You sounded rather desperate." "Arthur, I could hardly refuse." They stepped into the night, where a sleek black Daimler waited, its driver tipping his cap. As they settled into the leather seats, Bantry's face grew grave. "It's a grim business, Jane. Murder at the Crown Hotel, of all places, the sort of thing that shakes a town like Danimouth." "Tell me everything," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but insistent, as the car glided through the cobbled streets toward the seafront. Bantry cleared his throat. "The victim is Charles Grayson, a businessman from London, mid-40s, wealthy but not well-liked. Found dead in his suite 2 nights ago, poisoned with cyanide in his brandy. His wife, Eleanor Grayson, was with him. She's been arrested, and the police are certain she did it. But I'm not so sure. There's something off about the whole affair." Miss Marple's fingers rested lightly on her knitting bag, her mind already turning. "Cyanide is a bold choice," she murmured, quick but not subtle. "What do we know of Mrs. Grayson?" "Youngish, about 30, Bantry replied. "Quiet, refined, not the sort you'd peg for a She claims she's innocent, says she didn't touch the brandy, but the suite was locked, and no one else was seen going in or out. The evidence points to her, and the inspector's keen to close the case. Miss Marple nodded, gazing out at the passing shop fronts, their windows dark. Evidence can be like a badly hung picture, Arthur. It looks right until you notice the tilt. What was Mr. Grayson like? A bully, Bantry said bluntly. Made his fortune in shipping, but he had a temper. Snapped at the hotel staff, made enemies easily. I heard he humiliated a waiter in front of a full dining room last week. Not the kind of man who inspires loyalty or love, Miss Marple added quietly, and the hotel itself. The Crown's the pride of Dannymoth, Bantry said, a note of civic pride creeping in. Edwardian, grand as you like, marble floors, chandeliers, the lot. Caters to the well-heeled Londoners, mostly, down for the sea air. The staff are top-notch, but they're stretched thin this season. Lots of comings and goings. The car turned onto the esplanade, and the Crown Hotel came into view. Its facade a symphony of white stone and arched windows, illuminated by gaslights that cast a warm glow. It stood like a dowager duchess, elegant yet imposing, its turrets silhouetted against the moonlit sea. The Daimler pulled up at the entrance, where a liveried doorman sprang forward to open the door. Miss Marple stepped out, her sharp eyes taking in every detail: the polished brass fittings, the crisp uniforms of the bellboys, the faint hum of activity within. The lobby was a marvel of opulence, its marble floor gleaming under a vast chandelier that dripped with crystal. Potted palms flanked the reception desk, where a clerk scribbled in a ledger. Guests in evening dress drifted toward the dining room, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. Bantry led her to a quiet corner near a fireplace, where a low table held a silver tray with a teapot and cups. "I've had them prepare your usual room," he said, settling into a plush armchair, "but I thought we'd talk first. The police are upstairs, guarding the suite. Inspector Craddock's in charge, decent chap, but a bit by the book." Miss Marple poured tea, her movements precise. "And what does Inspector Craddock make of it?" "He's got his sights on Eleanor Grayson," Bantry said, stirring sugar into his cup. The brandy was poured from a decanter in the suite. Cyanide was found in the glass and nowhere else. Eleanor was the only one there when Grayson collapsed. She called for help, but by the time the doctor arrived, he was gone. Craddock thinks it's open and shut. Open and shut cases, Miss Marple said, sipping her tea, are often the ones with the tightest knots. Was the decanter tested? Bantry nodded. Just the brandy was poisoned. No traces in the decanter itself. The bottle was one Grayson, brought from London, unopened until that night. Eleanor says he poured it himself. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. A bottle from London, a decanter in the suite, and a glass with cyanide. Curious who had access to the room. "Only the Graysons, as far as we know," Bantry said. "The staff delivered towels and such, but the suite was locked otherwise. Grayson was particular about privacy." "Privacy," Miss Marple mused, "is a luxury that invites opportunity. Tell me about the staff." Bantry leaned back, his mustache twitching. "There's Mr. Willis, the head porter, been with the Crown for 20 years. Bit of a martinet, walks with a limp from an old war wound. The chambermaid, Lily, is a local girl, jumpy but harmless. Then there's Tom Carter, the waiter Grayson clashed with, young, charming, but there's talk he's in debt. The rest are the usual lot cooks, bellboys, cleaners, all vetted but you know how it is. A hotel's a world of its own. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her gaze drifting to a group of waiters crossing the lobby, their trays balanced with practiced ease. One, a slim young man with slicked back hair, lingered near a pillar, his eyes darting toward a guest's conversation. A world with many eyes and ears, and grudges, I dare say. Bantry followed her gaze. You think the staff's involved? I think, Miss Marple said, setting down her cup, that a hotel is like a village. Everyone knows everyone's business, but no one admits it. A man like Charles Grayson, with his temper, would leave ripples. We must find where those ripples lead. Bantry rubbed his chin. You'll want to see the suite, I suppose. Tomorrow, Miss Marple said. Tonight, I'd like to observe. People reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. Bantry chuckled. You haven't changed a bit, Jane, still seeing through walls. They finished their tea, and Bantry escorted her to the lift, a gilded cage operated by a boy in a red uniform. Her room was on the 3rd floor, a cozy space with a 4-poster bed, a writing desk, and a window overlooking the sea. The waves whispered against the shore, a soothing counterpoint to the puzzle forming in her mind. She unpacked her suitcase, placing her knitting on the bedside table and her book beside it. But sleep was far from her thoughts. Instead, she changed into a simple black dress and pinned her hat with care. The hotel's lounge, she reasoned, would be lively at this hour, a perfect place to watch and listen. She descended to the ground floor, her step light, and entered the lounge, where a pianist played a soft waltz. Guests clustered in groups, their jewels glinting in the lamplight. Miss Marple chose a corner table, ordered a pot of chamomile tea, and opened her knitting bag. Her needles clicked rhythmically, a disguise as effective as any cloak of invisibility. The lounge was a microcosm of Damon's elite, a retired admiral pontificating about naval strategy, a dowager in pearls gossiping about a scandal in Bath, a young couple whispering over champagne. But Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the staff. A chambermaid, Lily, perhaps hurried past, her apron askew, her face pale. The head porter, Mr. Willis, stood near the entrance, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the room like a general surveying a battlefield. And there was the waiter, Tom Carter, serving a tray of cocktails with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Marple's needles paused as she watched Tom. He moved with a dancer's grace, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a flicker of unease when a guest mentioned Grayson's name. She recalled Bantry's story of the public humiliation. In St. Mary Mead, a similar incident, a farmer berating a stable boy, had led to a barn fire, though no one could prove it. Resentment, she knew, was a slow-burning fuse. A woman in a green silk gown approached Tom, her voice sharp. "This isn't what I ordered," she snapped, pushing a glass toward him. Tom's smile tightened, but he apologized smoothly, replacing the drink with a bow. Miss Marple noted the exchange, her mind filing it away. A man who could mask anger so well was a man worth watching. The pianist shifted to a livelier tune, and the room grew noisier. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes moving from face to face. A bellboy whispered to a colleague, their heads close. A cleaner polished a brass railing with unnecessary vigor. The hotel pulsed with life, its secrets hidden in plain sight. She thought of Charles Grayson, alone in his suite, sipping poisoned brandy. Had he known his killer? Had he sensed the danger in that final moment? Her thoughts were interrupted by Colonel Bantry, who appeared at her table, his face flushed. a brandy of his own. Settling in, Jane? Quite, she replied, her needles resuming their dance. It's a fascinating place, Arthur. So many stories in one room. Bantry glanced around, puzzled. Stories. Looks like a lot of toffs enjoying themselves. To me, Miss Marple smiled. That's what makes them stories, Arthur. The surface is never the whole tale. Tomorrow I'll see Mrs. Grayson and the suite. But tonight I'm learning the rhythm of this place. Bantry shook his head, amused. You're a marvel, Jane. I'll leave you to it. Breakfast at 8. Perfect, she said, and he departed, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Miss Marple remained until the pianist played his final notes and the lounge began to empty. She gathered her knitting and rose, her mind alight with observations. The Crown Hotel was indeed a world of its own, its grandeur a facade for the human frailties beneath. Charles Grayson's death was no isolated act. It was a thread in a larger tapestry woven from motive and opportunity. As she rode the lift to her room, she thought of Eleanor Grayson, alone in a cell, her life hanging on the truth. Miss Marple's task was clear, to find the loose thread and pull until the pattern revealed itself. She stepped into her room, the sea's whisper following her, and prepared for bed. But her eyes, sharp as ever, lingered on the horizon, where the first hint of dawn waited to break. Chapter 3. The Accused. The morning sun rose over Danimouth, painting the sea in hues of gold and sapphire, its light filtering through the tall windows of the Crown Hotel. Miss Jane Marple, refreshed after a restful night, dressed in her usual sombre black, the severity of her attire softened by a delicate lace collar. Her hat, pinned neatly, sat beside her knitting bag on the bed. She glanced at the sea from her window, its restless waves a mirror to her thoughts, before descending to the dining room for breakfast with Colonel Bantry. The dining room was a splendid affair, with starched linen tablecloths and silver cutlery gleaming under chandeliers. Bantry was already seated, his plate piled with kedgeree and toast, his expression a mix of anticipation and unease. "Slept well, Jane?" he asked as she joined him, her small frame settling into the cushioned chair. "Quite well, Arthur," she replied, accepting a cup of tea from a waiter. "A clear mind requires rest, and I have much to consider." Bantry leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I've arranged for you to meet Eleanor Grayson this morning. She's at the magistrate's office, under guard. Inspector Craddock wasn't keen, but I pulled a few strings. You'll have half an hour." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the room. The other guests, businessmen, holidaymakers, a few aging aristocrats, chatted over their breakfasts, oblivious to the drama unfolding. In their midst, a waiter, not Tom Carter, glided past with a tray of scones, his face impassive. "Good," she said. "Mrs. Grayson's story is the first thread we must follow. A wife accused of murder is rarely the whole tale." After breakfast, Bantry drove her to the magistrate's office, a squat stone building near the town square, its facade stern and unyielding. The air inside was cool, tinged with the scent of ink and old wood. A constable led them to a small windowless room where Eleanor Grayson waited. The door closed with a heavy thud, leaving Miss Marple and Bantry alone with the accused. Eleanor Grayson sat at a plain oak table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was younger than Miss Marple had expected, perhaps 30, with a delicate beauty that seemed faded, like a flower pressed too long in a book. Her auburn hair was pinned loosely, and her grey dress hung loosely on her frame. Her eyes, a soft hazel, met Miss Marple's with a mixture of fear and defiance, though her pale cheeks betrayed her exhaustion. "Mrs. Grayson," Bantry began, his tone gentle, "this is Miss Marple, a friend of mine. She's here to help. You can speak freely." Eleanor's gaze flickered to Miss Marple, assessing her. "I don't know what more I can say," she said, her voice low but steady. "I didn't kill Charles. I loved him, despite everything." Miss Marple settled into a chair opposite, her hands folded calmly. "I'm sure this is difficult, Mrs. Grayson," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "But if you'll permit me, I'd like to hear your account of that night. Every detail, no matter how small. Small things, you see, often lead to the truth." Eleanor hesitated, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. Then, with a deep breath, she began. "It was Tuesday evening. Charles and I had been at the Crown for a week, a holiday he insisted on, though he was in a foul mood from the start. He'd been arguing with business associates in London, and he took it out on everyone, me, the staff, even strangers. That night, we dined in the hotel restaurant. Charles drank heavily, as he often did, and snapped at the waiter over a cold soup. We returned to our suite around 7. Miss Marple listened intently, her eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. "And how was your relationship with your husband?" she asked, her tone mild. Eleanor's lips tightened. "Charles was difficult. He could be charming when we met, but over the years, his temper grew worse. He was critical, demanding, but I stayed because I believed in our vows. And he wasn't always cruel. There were moments when he was kind, generous even." Miss Marple nodded, her mind recalling a spinster in St. Mary Mead, who had endured a tyrant of a brother for decades, out of duty and fleeting hope. "Go on. My dear, what happened in the suite?" "We were alone," Eleanor said. "Charles was still angry, picking at me over trivial things, my dress, my manners. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't listen. He poured himself a brandy from the decanter in the cabinet, as he did every night. It was his ritual, a glass before bed. I was reading by the window, trying to ignore him. Then, suddenly, he gasped, clutched his chest, and fell to the floor. I ran to him, but he was gone. His face was twisted, his eyes open. I screamed for help." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. "The decanter, was it always kept in the suite?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "It was part of the room's furnishings. Charles liked to pour his own drinks. He didn't trust the staff to do it properly. And the brandy itself?" Miss Marple asked. "It was a bottle he'd brought from London." Eleanor said. "He was particular about his brandy, always a specific brand. He opened it that night, poured it into the decanter himself. I saw him do it." Miss Marple's fingers twitched, as if reaching for her knitting. "Did anyone else enter the suite that evening, before or after this?" Eleanor frowned, her brow furrowing. "The head porter, Mr. Willis, brought fresh towels around 8. Charles was rude to him, as usual. Willis left quickly. No one else came in. The door was locked, and Charles kept the key." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "And the glass, Mrs. Grayson, the one Charles drank from?" "It was on the table beside him," Eleanor said. "One of the hotel's glasses, crystal, from the cabinet. I didn't touch it. When the doctor arrived, he said it was cyanide. I don't know how it got there. I swear I didn't do it." Her voice broke, and she pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. Bantry shifted uncomfortably, but Miss Marple remained still, her gaze unwavering. "One last question, my dear," she said. Did your husband have enemies? Anyone who might have wished him harm? Eleanor lowered the handkerchief, her eyes haunted. Charles made enemies wherever he went. He was harsh with business rivals, cruel to staff. I heard whispers in the hotel staff muttering about his temper, but I don't know anyone specific. He never shared his troubles with me. Miss Marple sat back, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Mrs. Grayson. You've been very clear. We'll do all we can to find the truth. Eleanor nodded, her shoulders sagging. The constable returned, signalling the end of the visit, and Bantry escorted Miss Marple from the room. As they stepped into the corridor, he whispered, "What do you make of her, Jane? She seems genuine, but the evidence?" "Evidence," Miss Marple said softly, "is like a garden path. It leads somewhere, but not always where you expect. Mrs. Grayson is frightened, but her story holds together. The porter's visit is a detail we must explore. A man delivering towels sees more than he's meant to." Bantry drove her back to the Crown, the sea sparkling under the morning sun. Miss Marple's mind was alive with questions. Eleanor's account was straightforward, yet it raised possibilities. The locked suite, the brandy, the porter's brief presence all were pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit neatly. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a maid's fleeting visit to a parlour had revealed a theft no one suspected. Hotels, like villages, were places of hidden currents. Back at the Crown, Miss Marple declined Bantry's offer of luncheon, preferring to explore the hotel on her own. She wandered through the lobby, her steps slow and deliberate, her eyes missing nothing. The marble floors gleamed, the chandeliers sparkled, but her attention was drawn to the staff. A bellboy hurried past, his arms laden with luggage. A cleaner polished a banister, her movements mechanical. Miss Marple paused near the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting letters, his pen scratching rhythmically. She settled into a plush armchair in the lounge, her knitting bag at her side, and opened a copy of the Times, though her eyes were on the room. The lounge was quieter now, with only a few guests reading or sipping coffee. A waiter, Tom Carter, she noted, cleared a table, his movements swift, but tense. She recalled Bantry's mention of his clash with Charles Grayson. A public humiliation could fester, she knew, like a wound left untreated. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Lily, the chambermaid, pushing a cart of linens. The girl was slight, with mousy hair and nervous eyes that darted toward the staff entrance. Miss Marple lowered her newspaper, watching as Lily paused to speak to Tom. Their exchange was brief, their heads close, but Lily's hands trembled as she adjusted a towel. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a habit that steadied her thoughts. Fear, she mused, or guilt, or perhaps something else. She rose, tucking her newspaper under her arm, and approached the reception desk. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up. "May I help you, madame?" "I believe my room needs fresh towels," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "Could you send the chambermaid, Lily, is it?" "To see to it, of course," the clerk said, making a note. "I'll have her up directly." Miss Marple thanked him and returned to her room, her mind turning over Eleanor's words. The porter's visit, the locked door, the untouched decanterol pointed to a narrow window of opportunity. She thought of cyanide, its bitter almond scent, its swift brutality. A poisoner needed access, knowledge, and nerve. Eleanor Grayson, with her trembling hands and steady voice, seemed an unlikely candidate, yet the police were convinced. In her room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The sea stretched endlessly before her, its surface calm but hiding depths. She opened her book, but her eyes strayed to the horizon. The truth, she knew, lay in the details. A porter's limp, a waiter's grudge, a wife's despair. Lily arrived shortly, her knock timid. Miss Marple invited her in, noting the girl's flushed cheeks and downcast eyes. "Just the towels, please," Miss Marple said, her tone kindly. "It's a busy place, this hotel. You must see all sorts of things." Lily nodded, replacing the towels with quick, jerky movements. "It's hectic, ma'am. Guests can be demanding. Like Mr. Grayson, I suppose," Miss Marple said. Casually, her eyes on her knitting. Lily froze, her hands gripping a towel. "He was difficult," she whispered. "Always shouting. But he's gone now." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Such a tragedy. Did you ever see him with anyone unusual? Guests, perhaps, or staff?" Lily shook her head too quickly. "No, ma'am. I just clean the rooms." She curtsied and fled, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts. The encounter confirmed her suspicions. The staff knew more than they admitted. Lily's fear, Tom's tension, Willis's reservoir were threads in the same tapestry. Miss Marple closed her book, her mind alight with possibilities. Eleanor Grayson was innocent, she felt certain, but the real killer was close, hidden among the hotel's polished surfaces. She would need to tread carefully, watching, listening, until the truth emerged like a pattern in her knitting dot. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Miss Marple prepared to meet Inspector Craddock and visit the Grayson suite. The case was far from open and shut, and she relished the challenge. The Crown Hotel, with its secrets and shadows, was a puzzle worthy of her skill, and she would not rest until every piece was in place. Chapter 4. The scene of the crime. The late morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Crown Hotel, casting long shadows across the marble lobby as Miss Jane Marple descended the grand staircase. Her black dress was immaculate, her hat pinned with precision, and her knitting bag swung lightly at her side. The bustle of the hotel surrounded her, bellboys darting with luggage, guests murmuring over morning papers, but her mind was fixed on the task ahead. An inspection of the Graysons' suite, where Charles Grayson had met his untimely end. Colonel Bantry had arranged for Inspector Craddock to meet her there, and she felt the familiar stir of anticipation. Like a gardener spotting the first shoots of a new planting dot, she found Bantry in the lounge, nursing a cup of coffee, his face etched with the strain of the case. "Ready, Jane?" he asked, rising as she approached. "Quite ready, Arthur," she replied, her voice serene but her eyes sharp. "A crime scene is like a letter, written in haste but full of meaning if you read it carefully." They crossed the lobby to the lift, its gilded doors gleaming under the chandelier's glow. The operator, a young man with a freckled face, nodded respectfully as they entered. The lift hummed upward, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Eleanor Grayson's account. A locked suite, a decanter, a glass of poisoned brandy. The simplicity of it was deceptive, like a village quarrel that hid deeper motives. The third floor. The corridor was hushed, its thick carpet muffling their steps. A constable stood guard outside suite 312, his expression dour. Inspector Craddock waited inside, a tall man in his 40s with a nonsense air and a notebook tucked under his arm. His suit was neatly pressed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration as he greeted them. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone polite but guarded. "Colonel Bantry says you've a knack for these things. I'll show you the room, but Warn you, it's a straightforward case. Mrs. Grayson's our woman." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "Straightforward cases, Inspector, are often the most crooked. Shall we?" The suite was a study in luxury, its spacious sitting room adorned with damask wallpaper and heavy velvet drapes. A mahogany writing desk stood against one wall. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, and a pair of armchairs flanked a low table. Beyond, a door led to a bedroom, its four-poster bed visible through the gap. The air carried a faint trace of lavender, likely from the cleaning staff, but Miss Marple's nose twitched. Seeking something else, perhaps the ghost of cyanide's bitter almond scent, Craddock gestured to the drinks cabinet, a polished mahogany piece with glass doors positioned near the window. "This is where it happened," he said. Grayson poured his brandy from that decanter. He pointed to a crystal decanter, now sealed in a police evidence bag on the table. The glass was found beside him, on the floor. Cyanide in the brandy, confirmed by the lab. No traces in the decanter or the bottle he brought from London. Miss Marple approached the cabinet, her step deliberate. The glass doors were locked, but she noted the key in the lock, its brass surface gleaming. She bent slightly, her eyes scanning the cabinet's surface. A faint scratch, no longer than a thumbnail, marred the polished wood near the decanter's usual spot. She ran her finger lightly over it, her touch as delicate as if tracing a stitch. "Curious," she murmured. Craddock frowned. "What's that? This mark," she said, pointing. "It's fresh, I think. As if something heavy scraped the wood." Craddock peered at it, his brow furrowing. "Probably a guest's carelessness. The cabinet's old. It's just a mark." Miss Marple's lips twitched, but she said nothing, turning instead to the room's layout. The sitting room had two entrances, the main door from the corridor, now guarded, and a smaller door to the bedroom. She crossed to the main door, examining. The lock, it was a sturdy Yale, its mechanism gleaming. "Mrs. Grayson said the door was locked," she said, half to herself, "and Mr. Grayson kept the key." "That's right," Craddock said. She confirmed it. No sign of forced entry. The key was in Grayson's pocket when we found him. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the window. It overlooked the sea, the waves glittering under the sun. The sash was firmly closed, its latch secure. "No one climbed in, then," she said, "and the bedroom." Craddock led her through the connecting door. The bedroom was equally opulent, with a silk coverlet on the bed and a walnut wardrobe in the corner. A bedside table held a lamp and a copy of the Illustrated London News. Miss Marple noted a second window, also locked, and a small dressing table where Eleanor's hairbrush and a bottle of scent lay untouched. Everything was in order, yet the room felt heavy, as if it held its breath. She returned to the sitting room, her eyes drawn again to the drinks cabinet. "The glass," she said. "Where exactly was it found?" Craddock pointed to a spot near the armchair, marked with a chalk outline, right there. Grayson was sitting, according to Mrs. Grayson. He took a sip, collapsed, and the glass fell. She didn't touch it, or so she claims. Miss Marple knelt, her movements slow but steady, and studied the carpet. It was a rich burgundy, recently cleaned, but she noticed a faint stain near the chalk mark, barely visible. "A spill, perhaps," she said. Brandy Craddock shrugged. "Likely. The carpet's been walked on since. Doesn't tell us much." "Everything tells us something, Inspector," Miss Marple said, rising. She turned to the decanter, now in its evidence bag. "May I see it?" Craddock hesitated, then nodded. He opened the bag, holding the decanter aloft. Its crystal facets caught the light, sparkling like a jewel. Miss Marple examined it without touching, noting its stopper, tightly fitted, and the absence of any visible residue. "A fine piece," she said, "and it was always kept in the cabinet." "So Mrs. Grayson says," Craddock replied. "Grayson poured fresh brandy into it that night, from his own bottle. We tested the bottle clean. The poison was only in the glass." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Only in the glass," she repeated softly, "yet the decanter was the source. Tell me, Inspector, was the cabinet locked when you arrived?" Craddock consulted his notebook. "Yes," Mrs. Grayson said. "Grayson kept it locked, and the key was on his chain, with the room key. We found it there." "Interesting," Miss Marple said. She stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. The armchair, where Grayson had sat, faced the window, its cushions slightly askew. The low table held a silver cigarette case and an ashtray, both untouched. She pictured the scene: Grayson, irritable, pouring his brandy; Eleanor, reading by the window; the sudden gasp, the fall, and somewhere, unseen, the hand that placed the poison. She turned to Craddock. "You've been thorough, Inspector. But suppose the poison wasn't added to the brandy at all? Suppose it was in the decanter beforehand, waiting?" Craddock's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. The decanter was clean. We tested it." "Tests," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "are like signposts. They point to truth, but they don't always see the path. A decanter could be tampered with, cleaned, and reused. The scratch on the cabinet suggests haste, perhaps a tool used to force it open." Craddock scoffed. "You're reaching, Miss Marple. The cabinet was locked, the key with Grayson. No one else had access." "No one?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. "Hotels are busy places, Inspector. Staff come and go. A porter, a maid, a waiter Rennie might find a moment." Bantry, who had been silent, cleared his throat. "Jane's got a point, Craddock. Grayson wasn't popular. Someone could have held a grudge." Craddock sighed. "We're looking into the staff, but there's no evidence anyone entered the suite except the porter, Willis, with the towels, and he was in and out in a minute." Miss Marple's lips curved. "A minute is a long time, Inspector, when motives are sharp. I'd like to speak with Mr. Willis later. For now, may I see the glass?" Craddock produced another evidence bag, containing a heavy crystal tumbler. It was unremarkable, its surface clean but for a faint smudge near the rim. Miss Marple peered at it, her mind racing. "The cyanide was in the brandy," she said. "But how did it get there? A glass is a small thing, easily handled, easily replaced." "You think someone swapped the glass?" Craddock asked, his skepticism clear. "I think," Miss Marple said, "that we must consider all possibilities. A locked room is not a sealed one. People move through hotels like shadows." She stepped to the window, her eyes on the sea. The suite felt oppressive now, its elegance tainted by death. She thought of a burglary in St. Mary Mead, where a locked door had hidden a servant's betrayal. Hotels, like villages, thrived on trust, but trust was fragile. Someone had breached this room's sanctity, and the scratch on the cabinet was a clue, small but insistent. "Anything else, Miss Marple?" Craddock asked, his patience thinning. "Not for now," she said, turning to him. "You've been most helpful. I'd like to sit here a moment, if I may, to think." Craddock hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. The constable will lock up. He and Bantry stepped into the corridor. Leaving her alone, Miss Marple settled into the armchair, her knitting bag at her feet. The room was silent, save for the distant murmur of the sea. She closed her eyes, letting the scene replay in her mind. Grayson, pouring his drink. Eleanor, distant. The porter, fleetingly present. The scratch nagged at her, a mark of carelessness in an otherwise meticulous crime. She pictured a hand, hurried, forcing the cabinet open, perhaps with a tula. Knife, a letter opener. The poison, she suspected, had been placed earlier, the decanter cleaned to hide the act. But how, and by whom? Her eyes opened, falling on the cigarette case. She rose, examining it. It was silver, engraved with Grayson's initials, but its surface was smudged, as if handled recently. She made a mental note to ask Craddock if it had been tested for prints. Every detail, she knew, was a thread in the tapestry. The constable knocked, signalling her time was up. She gathered her bag and left the suite, her step light but her mind heavy with questions. The corridor was empty now, the constable locking the door behind her. She descended to the lobby, where Bantry waited. "Well, Jane," he asked. "Find anything?" "A beginning," she said, her eyes twinkling. "The room speaks, Arthur, if you listen. The scratch on the cabinet is a whisper of truth. We must learn who made it and why." Bantry chuckled. "You see more in a scratch than most see in a confession. What's next?" "Lunch," Miss Marple said, "and a chat with Mr. Willis. A porter sees much, and I suspect he knows more than he tells." They moved to the dining room, where the clatter of cutlery and hum of conversation enveloped them. Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, noting the staff, a waiter balancing a tray, a maid slipping through a side door. The Crown Hotel was a stage, its players hiding their roles. She thought of Charles Grayson, his life ended by a sip of brandy, and of Eleanor, her future hanging on a truth yet to be uncovered. The case was a puzzle, its pieces scattered, but Miss Marple was patient. She would find each one, and the picture would emerge, clear as the sea beyond the windows. Chapter 5. The hotel staffer. Midday sun bathed the Crown Hotel in a warm glow, its rays glinting off the polished brass fittings of the grand entrance. Miss Jane Marple sat in the hotel's elegant dining room, her small figure almost lost in her backed chair, a plate of poached sole and buttered peas before her. Her black dress and neat hat lent her an air of unobtrusive respectability, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. The clink of cutlery and murmur of conversation filled the air, yet her attention was fixed on the hotel staff, moving like silent currents through the opulent space. Colonel Bantry, her companion at the table, was midway through a hearty portion of roast beef, his fork pausing as he glanced at her. "You're awfully quiet, Jane," he said, his moustache twitching. "Plotting something, I'll wager." Miss Marple smiled, her knitting bag resting by her feet, observing Arthur. "A hotel is like a village green. Everyone passes through, and their steps tell a story. I'm learning the rhythm of this place." Bantry chuckled, slicing his beef. "You make a waiter's tray sound like a Shakespearean drama. What's caught your eye?" "The staff," she replied, her voice soft but deliberate. "They see everything, hear everything, yet they're trained to be invisible. Charles Grayson's death was no accident, and I suspect the answer lies with those who served him." After lunch, Miss Marple excused herself, declining Bantry's offer to join him for a stroll along the esplanade. She had a purpose: to study the hotel's inner workings, to watch the men and women who kept its grandeur afloat. She began in the lobby, settling into a plush armchair near a towering potted palm, her copy of the Times open but unread. Her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a perfect disguise for her vigilance. The lobby was a hive of activity. Guests checked in, their voices a mix of London drawls and provincial burrs. Bellboys darted with suitcases, their caps slightly askew. At the reception desk, the clerk scribbled in a ledger, his spectacles glinting. Miss Marple's gaze settled. On the head porter, Mr. Willis, a wiry man with a pronounced limp, his dark uniform crisp despite the bustle. He directed his team with the precision of a conductor, his face stern but his eyes restless, scanning the room as if expecting trouble. She recalled Eleanor Grayson's mention of his brief visit to the suite, delivering towels. A porter, she knew, was privy to a hotel's secrets, his role granting access to private spaces. Near the staircase, the chambermaid, Lily, pushed a cart laden with linens, her movements hurried. Her mousy hair was tucked under a cap, and her eyes darted nervously, avoiding contact with guests. Miss Marple noted her pale complexion, the way her hands trembled as she adjusted a stack of towels. Fear, she thought, or perhaps a secret too heavy to carry. In St. Mary Mead, a similar nervousness in a shopgirl had led to the discovery of a stolen brooch, hidden out of desperation. Then there was Tom Carter, the waiter, gliding through the lobby with a tray of empty glasses. His boyish charm was evident in his quick smile, but Miss Marple saw a hardness in his eyes, a tension in his posture. Bantry had mentioned Grayson's public humiliation of him a spilled drink, a tirade. In the dining room, such moments, she knew, could fester, like a splinter left in the skin. Tom paused to speak to a bellboy, their exchange brief but intense, their heads close. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind filing the moment away. She rose, tucking her newspaper under her arm, and wandered toward the lounge, a spacious room with velvet drapes and a grand piano. The afternoon crowd was thinner, retired couple playing bridge, a young woman writing letters, but the staff were ever present. Miss Marple chose a table near the window, ordering a pot of Darjeeling tea. As she waited, she opened her knitting bag, her needles resuming their dance. The lounge offered a clear view of the staff entrance, a discreet door through which waiters and maids slipped in and out. Her tea arrived, delivered by Tom Carter himself. His smile was polished, but his eyes flicked over her, assessing. "Anything else, madame?" he asked, his tone smooth. "Thank you, no," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "It's a fine hotel, isn't it? So many people working to keep it running." Tom nodded, his smile tightening. "It's a busy place. Keeps us on our toes." "I imagine," Miss Marple said, her eyes meeting his. "It must be trying, dealing with difficult guests. I heard Mr. Grayson was particular." Tom's hand twitched, nearly upsetting the teapot. "He was a guest, madame. We're used to all sorts." He excused himself, retreating to the staff entrance with a haste that did not escape her notice. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning. Tom's reaction was telling, a crack in his polished facade. She thought of a young man in St. Mary Mead, a gardener dismissed for a minor fault, who later set fire to his employer's shed. Resentment, she knew, was a powerful motive, and Tom's clash with Grayson was no small matter. But motive alone was not enough. She needed evidence, a link to the poisoned brandy. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lily, who entered the lounge to clear a table. The girl's movements were jerky, her eyes darting to the staff entrance as if expecting pursuit. Miss Marple watched, her needles slowing. Lily's nervousness was more pronounced today, her hands fumbling as she stacked plates. When a glass slipped, shattering on the floor, Lily gasped, her face flushing scarlet. A senior waiter appeared, his voice low but sharp, and Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears as she swept up the shards. Miss Marple rose, her step light, and approached the girl. "No harm done, my dear," she said, her voice kind. "Accidents happen." Lily looked up, startled, her hands clutching the broom. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "I didn't mean, of course not," Miss Marple said, her eyes gentle but probing. "You've a lot on your mind, I expect. This hotel must be full of stories." Lily swallowed, her gaze dropping. "It's just work, ma'am. Nothing special." "Work can be heavy," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational, "especially with guests like Mr. Grayson. I heard he was unkind to the staff." Lily's hands tightened on the broom. He shouted sometimes, but it's not my place to say." She curtsied and hurried away, leaving Miss Marple to ponder her words. The encounter confirmed her suspicions. The staff were uneasy, their loyalty to the hotel strained by Grayson's behavior. Lily's fear suggested knowledge, perhaps of something she dared not share. Miss Marple returned to her table, her tea cooling as she considered her next move. Mr. Willis, the head porter, was her next target. His access to the Grayson suite made him a key figure, and his stern demeanor hinted at a man who guarded his thoughts. She found Willis in the lobby, overseeing the delivery of a guest's trunk. His limp was pronounced, his left leg dragging slightly, but his authority was unquestioned, the bellboys snapping to attention at his nod. Miss Marple approached, her smile disarming. "Mr. Willis, I presume. I'm Miss Marple, a guest here. Might I have a word?" Willis turned, his expression guarded but polite. "Of course, madam. How may I assist?" "I'm told you're the heart of this hotel," she said, her tone flattering. "A head porter sees everything, doesn't he? I'm curious about the night Mr. Grayson died. You delivered towels to his suite, I believe." Willis's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained even. "I did, madam, around 8 o'clock. A routine task." "Routine," Miss Marple repeated, her eyes twinkling. "Yet Mr. Grayson was a difficult man, I hear. Was he unkind to you?" Willis stiffened, his hand tightening on his cane. "He was abrupt. Called me slow, but I'm used to such things. I was in and out in a moment." "And the suite?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle. "Anything unusual?" "The drinks cabinet, perhaps." Willis's gaze flickered, a fleeting shadow. "I didn't notice the cabinet, madam. I left the towels and went. My duties keep me busy." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering. "You must see so much, moving through these corridors. People forget how much a porter knows." Willis nodded curtly, excusing himself as a bellboy called for assistance. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind racing. His defensiveness was subtle, but it was there, like a snag in a seam. The scratch on the drinks cabinet, she thought, could have been made by a cane, its tip scraping in haste. Willis's limp gave him a plausible excuse for leaning on furniture, but it also placed him at the scene, however briefly. She returned to the lounge, her thoughts a tapestry of impressions. The staff were the key, their interactions a web of loyalties and grudges. Tom's resentment, Lily's fear, Willis's reserve all pointed to a deeper truth. She recalled a theft in St. Mary Mead, where a butler's stiff politeness had masked his guilt. Hotels, like villages, thrived on appearances, but beneath the surface, motives simmered. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple decided to test her observations. She approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting mail. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I believe my room's decanter needs refilling. Could you send someone to check, and perhaps ask Mr. Carter, the waiter, to assist? He seems so capable." The clerk nodded, making a note. At once, Miss Marple returned to her room, settling by the window with her knitting. The sea sparkled beyond, its waves a reminder of time's relentless march. She wanted to see Tom in action, to gauge his behavior in a private setting. When he arrived, his knock was brisk, his smile professional but strained. "Checking the decanter, madame?" he asked, stepping inside. "Yes, please," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "It's such a lovely touch, these decanters. Like the one in Mr. Grayson's suite, I suppose." Tom's hand paused on the cabinet, his smile faltering. "I wouldn't know, madam. I work the dining room, not the suites." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her eyes on her knitting. "But news travels fast in a hotel. Such a tragedy, his death. I heard he was unkind to you." Tom's face hardened, but he recovered quickly. "Guests can be difficult. It's part of the job." He checked the decanter, declared it full, and left, his step quicker than necessary. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind alight. Tom's discomfort was palpable, his denial too swift. She thought of the poisoned brandy, the locked suite, the fleeting presence of Willis. Someone had found a way to tamper with the decanter, perhaps during a moment of distraction. The staff, with their access and grievances, were the likeliest candidates. But the how and why remained elusive. She rose, preparing for dinner with Bantry. The dining room was crowded, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and claret. As she joined Bantry, she shared her observations, her voice low. "The staff are uneasy, Arthur. Tom Carter hides his anger, Lily her fear, and Willis his thoughts. One of them knows something, perhaps more than they realize." Bantry nodded, his eyes on his soup. "You think one of them did it?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "that Charles Grayson's death was a carefully laid trap, and the staff hold the clues. We must watch them, listen to their silences. The truth is there, waiting to be seen." As the meal progressed, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the waiters, the maids, the porters moving through the room. The Crown Hotel was a world of polished surfaces, but beneath, the currents ran deep. She would follow them, patient as a knitter, until the pattern of the crime emerged, clear and undeniable. Chapter 6. A Grudge Uncovered. The afternoon sun dipped low over Danimouth, casting a rosy glow across the Crown Hotel's white stone facade. Inside, the dining room hummed with the clatter of teacups and the soft murmur of guests, their conversations, a tapestry of trivialities and secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her black dress blending into the shadows of the velvet drapes behind her. A pot of Earl Grey steamed gently before her, but her attention was elsewhere, fixed on the subtle dance of the hotel staff as they moved through the room. Her knitting lay untouched in its bag, her sharp eyes tracking every glance, every pause. The case of Charles Grayson's murder was a puzzle, and she sensed the next piece lay in the undercurrents of resentment that rippled through the hotel's polished corridors. Colonel Bantry had invited her to dine with him that evening, a private affair in one of the hotel's smaller rooms, reserved for distinguished guests. The invitation was more than social. Bantry, with his magistrate's ear for gossip, had promised to share what he'd gleaned about Grayson's reputation. Miss Marple arrived early, her step light but purposeful, and settled into a plush chair by a window overlooking the sea. The room was intimate, its walls adorned with gilt-framed seascapes, and a single chandelier cast a warm glow over the mahogany table. She opened her copy of The Vicar of Wakefield, but her eyes strayed to the door, where a waiter-not, Tom Carter, ranged silverware with mechanical precision. Bantry arrived promptly at 7, his tweed suit slightly rumpled, his moustache bristling with anticipation. "Jane, you look as if you've already solved the case," he said, settling opposite her. "That twinkle in your eye, it's positively alarming." Miss Marple smiled, closing her book. "Not solved, Arthur, but closer. A case like this is like a badly woven scar. One must find the loose thread and pull gently. I've been watching the staff, and I believe we're near a revelation." Bantry raised an eyebrow, signaling the waiter for a glass of claret. "The staff, I've been doing some digging myself, as it happens. Grayson was a brute, no question, made enemies faster than a fox in a henhouse. Care to hear the latest?" "Very much," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but eager. She leaned forward, her hands folded neatly, as the waiter served a delicate consomme, its aroma mingling with the sea air drifting through the cracked window. Bantry took a sip of his wine, his expression darkening. Charles Grayson wasn't just unpopular, he was loathed. I spoke to a fellow magistrate who knew him in London. Grayson's shipping business thrived on ruthless deals, undercutting rivals and squeezing his workers. Down here, he treated the hotel like his personal fiefdom, snapped at maids, berated porters. And here's the kicker: had a nasty run-in with that waiter, Tom Carter, about 10 days ago. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, though her face remained serene. "Tom Carter," she murmured. "What happened?" "It was in the dining room, full of guests," Bantry said, his voice low. "Grayson ordered a bottle of claret, but Carter spilled a drop while pouring. Nothing serious, mind you, but Grayson went off like a firecracker. Called Carter a clumsy idiot, said he ought to be sacked, and made a spectacle of it. Carter stood there, red-faced, while Grayson ranted. I heard from a guest who was there Carter muttered something under his breath as he walked away. Something about getting even." Miss Marple nodded, her mind conjuring the scene. She recalled a similar incident in St. Mary Mead, where a grocer's sharp tongue had driven a delivery boy to petty vandalism. "Public humiliation," she said, "is a wound that festers. A young man like Tom Carter, with pride and perhaps debts, might nurse such a grudge." "Did anyone else witness his reaction?" "Plenty," Bantry said, spooning his consomme. The dining room was packed. The head waiter had to step in, calm things down. Carter was sent to the kitchens for the rest of the evening. Word is, he was furious, swearing he'd make Grayson pay. Words, Miss Marple mused, are cheap, but they reveal the heart. Tom Carter interests me, Arthur. His charm is a mask, and masks slip under pressure. What else do we know of him?" Bantry shrugged, his attention shifting to the arrival of a roast pheasant, its golden skin glistening. "Not much. He's local, early 20s, been at the Crown a couple of years. Good at his job, but there's talk he's in debt gambling, some say. The sort of lad who smiles to your face but might hold a knife behind his back." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts racing. Debt was a powerful motivator, as was wounded pride. She pictured Tom, his quick smile and tense shoulders, moving through the hotel with access to its private corners. The drinks cabinet in the Grayson's suite, with its faint scratch, loomed in her mind. A waiter, slipping into a suite during a distraction, could tamper with a decanter, especially one driven by vengeance. But the how and when remained elusive. Resentment, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, is a slow poison, Arthur. It builds quietly, then strikes. Tom Carter may be our man, but we need more than gossip. We need his movements on the night of the murder. Bantry nodded, carving the pheasant with military precision. I'll have a word with Craddock, see what the police know, but you're right, Carter's a suspect worth watching. Anyone else catch your eye? Mr. Willis, the porter, Miss Marple, said, her eyes gleaming. His access to the suite is undeniable, and his reserve suggests a man who keeps his own counsel. And Lily, the chambermaid, she's frightened, Arthur, and frightened people often know more than they say. Bantry chuckled, passing her a slice of pheasant. You see more in a glance than most see in a lifetime, Jane. What's your next move? To listen, she said, her tone light but firm. The hotel is a stage, and the staff are its players. I shall watch their performance, note their hesitations. The truth is in their silences. After dinner, Miss Marple declined Bantry's offer of a nightcap, preferring to continue her observations. She returned to the lounge, where the evening crowd was gathering, a mix of holiday-makers in evening dress and locals sipping sherry. The pianist played a soft nocturne, its notes drifting like mist. She chose a table near the staff entrance, her knitting bag at her side, and ordered a glass of warm milk, a choice that drew a curious glance from the waiter. Her needles clicked steadily, a rhythm that steadied her thoughts. The lounge was a perfect vantage point. Guests chatted there, voices a hum of privilege, but Miss Marple's focus was on the staff. Tom Carter was serving a group of businessmen, his smile bright but his eyes darting, as if expecting a rebuke. Lily appeared briefly, clearing a table, her hands trembling as she stacked plates. Mr. Willis stood near the entrance, his cane tapping. Softly, his gaze sweeping the room like a lighthouse beam. Miss Marple's attention lingered on Tom. He moved with a dancer's grace, but there was a brittleness to him, a tension that betrayed his ease. She overheard a snippet of conversation as he passed a colleague a mention of debts and a way out. The words were fleeting, but they struck her like a bell. In St. Mary Mead, a blacksmith's son had turned to theft to settle gambling. Debts, his desperation hidden behind a cheerful facade. Tom, she suspected, was similarly trapped. His grudge against Grayson a spark that could ignite a darker act. She shifted her gaze to Lily, who was now polishing a brass lamp with unnecessary vigor. The girl's nervousness was palpable, her eyes flicking to Tom as he crossed the room. Miss Marple wondered if they shared a secret, a confidence born of proximity or coercion. Hotels, like villages, bred alliances, and Lily's fear suggested. She was caught in one dot. Mr. Willis, meanwhile, was a study in control. His limp gave him a distinctive gait, but his authority was unquestioned, the other staff deferring to him with nods and murmurs. Miss Marple recalled the scratch on the drinks cabinet, its edge sharp enough to catch a cane's tip. Willis's brief visit to the suite, delivering towels, placed him at the scene, but his demeanour was too composed, too practiced. She thought of a St. Mary Mead gardener whose gruff exterior hid a meticulous theft. Willis, she sensed, was a man who planned his steps. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple decided to test her observations. She approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting telegrams. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Carter, the waiter, About a small matter in the dining room. Could you fetch him? The clerk nodded, dispatching a bellboy. Miss Marple returned to her table, her knitting resumed. Tom appeared shortly, his smile polite but wary. You asked for me, madam. Yes, Miss Marple said, her eyes meeting his. I was in the dining room earlier, and I couldn't help overhearing talk of Mr. Grayson. Such a tragedy. I understand he was unkind to you. Tom's smile faltered, his hand gripping the tray he carried. He was a difficult guest, madame, but it's not my place to speak ill of the dead. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. But such incidents linger, don't they? A public slight can wound deeply. Tom's eyes flickered, a flash of anger quickly masked. I manage, madam, if there's nothing else. He bowed and retreated, his step brisk. Miss Marple leaned back, her needles pausing. Tom's reaction was telling, his control fraying. At the mention of Grayson, she suspected he was more than a bystander, but suspicion was not proof. The poison, the locked suite, the fleeting presence of Willa Saul pointed to a carefully orchestrated act, and Tom's grudge was a plausible motive, yet she needed to know his movements, his opportunities. She turned her attention to Lily, who was now near the piano, adjusting a vase of roses. Miss Marple rose, her steps slow, and approached the girl. Such lovely flowers, she said, her voice warm. You've a busy job, my dear, keeping this place so tidy. Lily started, nearly knocking over the vase. Oh, ma'am, I didn't. See you. Yes, it's a lot of work. I imagine, Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but probing. You must hear all sorts of things, working here. Mr. Grayson's death must have been a shock. Lily's hands trembled, her eyes darting to the staff entrance. It was awful, ma'am, but I don't know anything about it. I just clean. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. But you work with Mr. Carter, don't you? He seems a charming young man, though I hear he had trouble with Mr. Grayson. Lily's face paled, her voice barely a whisper. Tom's nice, ma'am. He didn't like Mr. Grayson, but who did? I shouldn't say more. She curtsied and fled, her apron fluttering. Miss Marple returned to her table, her mind alight. Lily's fear was a beacon, signalling a connection to Tom, perhaps a shared secret. She thought of the cyanide, its swift brutality, and the decanter, its crystal surface, hiding a deadly trap. Someone had planned Grayson's death, exploiting the hotel's rhythms, and the staff were the key. As the pianist played his final notes, Miss Marple gathered her things and rose, the lounge emptying round her. She made her way to her room, the sea's whisper following her through the open window. The case was a tapestry, its threads tangled but forming a pattern. Tom's grudge, Lily's fear, Willis's accessor were pieces of the truth. She would need to tread carefully, watching their interactions, listening to their silences. In her room, she sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The moon hung low over the sea, its light silvering the waves. She thought of Charles Grayson. His life ended by a sip of brandy, and of Eleanor, her innocence hanging on a truth yet to be uncovered. The Crown Hotel was a world of shadows, its secrets hidden in plain sight. Miss Marple would find them, patient as a knitter, until the murderer's face emerged, clear as the moonlight beyond. Chapter 7. The Porter's Tale. The morning air in Danimouth carried a crisp edge. The sea beyond the Crown Hotel glinting like a sheet of polished silver under the early sun. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her customary black with a shawl draped over her shoulders, stood at her room's window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The waves rolled in a steady rhythm, their cadence a counterpoint to the puzzle occupying her mind. Charles Grayson's murder was a knot of motives and opportunities, and the hotel staff, those silent movers through its opulent halls, held the threads she needed to unravel it. Her meeting with Eleanor Grayson, her inspection of the suite, and her observations of Tom Carter and Lily had sharpened her focus. But the head porter, Mr. Willis, was a figure she could no longer ignore. His brief presence in the Graysons' suite on the night of the murder placed him at the heart of the mystery, and Miss Marple was determined to learn what he knew. She descended to the dining room for breakfast, her knitting bag swinging lightly. At her side, the room was alive with the clink of porcelain and the soft buzz of conversation, guests savouring their kippers and toast. Colonel Bantry was already at their usual table, his face brightening as she approached. "Morning, Jane," he said, folding his newspaper. "You've that look, again like a cat watching a mouse. What's on the cards today?" Miss Marple settled into her chair, accepting a cup of tea from a passing waiter. "Mr. Willis, Arthur," she said, her voice low but firm, "the head porter. He delivered towels to the Graysons' suite just before the murder, and I suspect he saw more than he's let on. A man in his position is a gatekeeper of secrets, and I intend to open that." Gate Bantry nodded, spreading marmalade on his toast. "Willis is a tough nut. Been at the Crown forever, runs his team like a drill sergeant. Not the sort to chatter. How'll you get him talking?" "Persistence," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling, and a touch of flattery. "Men like Mr. Willis value their authority, and a kind word can loosen even the tightest lips. But first, I must see him in his element." After breakfast, Miss Marple made her way to the lobby, a grand space of marble and crystal where the hotel's pulse beat strongest. She chose a strategic seat near the reception desk, half hidden by a potted fern, and opened her knitting, her needles clicking softly. The lobby was a theatre of arrivals and departures, a family in tweeds checking out, a businessman barking orders to a bellboy, a dowager in furs demanding her morning post. But Miss Marple's attention was fixed on Mr. Willis, who stood like a sentinel near the main entrance, his dark uniform immaculate, his cane tapping rhythmically as he directed his porters. Willis was a man of middle years, lean and weathered, his face etched with lines that spoke of discipline and endurance. His limp, a relic of some long-ago injury, gave his movements a deliberate quality. But his authority was absolute, the bellboys responding to his clipped commands with military precision. Miss Marple noted his eyes, sharp and restless, scanning the lobby as if cataloguing every detail. She recalled the scratch on the drinks cabinet in the Graysons' suite, its edge suggestive of a hurried act. A cane, she thought, could make such a mark, especially if its owner leaned heavily in haste. Her chance came mid-morning, when a lull in the lobby's activity left Willis momentarily free. She rose, tucking her knitting into her bag, and approached him, her step slow and her smile disarming. "Mr. Willis," she said, her voice warm, "I'm Miss Marple, a guest here. I've been so impressed by the efficiency of your team. A head porter must be the backbone of a place like this." Willis turned, his expression guarded but softened by her flattery. "Thank you, madame," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "We do our best to keep things running smoothly." "I'm sure," Miss Marple said, her eyes meeting his. "It's no small task, with so many guests and their demands. I understand you were in the Graysons' suite the night of that dreadful business. It must have been a shock." Willis's hand tightened on his cane, his eyes narrowing. "A tragedy, madame. I delivered towels, as requested. I was there only a moment." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "But a man like you, with your experience, notices things. Mr. Grayson was difficult, I hear. Was he unkind to you that evening?" Willis's jaw tightened, a flicker of resentment crossing his face before he masked it. "He was sharp, madam. Called me a clumsy fool when I set the towels down. I'm used to such talk. Guests can be particular." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing, and the suite itself. Anything out of place. The drinks cabinet, perhaps, or the decanter. Willis's gaze shifted, a fleeting shadow. "I didn't look at the cabinet, madam. My job was the towels. I left directly." His voice was firm, but his eyes betrayed a hesitation, as if weighing what to reveal. "You're a busy man," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering, carrying towels up and down these corridors. "With that limp of yours, it must be tiring. Do you ever lean on the furniture to steady yourself?" Willis stiffened, his cane tapping once, sharply. "I manage, madam. I don't linger where I'm not needed." He excused himself, citing a guest's request, and limped away, his posture rigid. Miss Marple returned to her seat, her knitting resumed but her thoughts elsewhere. Willis's defensiveness was a thread, thin but significant. The scratch on the cabinet loomed large in her mind, its presence a whisper of carelessness in a meticulous crime. She pictured Willis in the suite, Grayson's harsh words ringing, the decanter within reach. A porter, she knew, had access to every corner of a hotel, his presence unremarkable. But Willis's reserve suggested a man who guarded more than towels. She decided to broaden her observations, moving to the lounge, where the afternoon crowd was gathering. The room was a haven of velvet and mahogany, its windows framing the sea's restless expanse. Miss Marple chose a table near the fireplace, ordering a pot of chamomile tea. Her knitting needles clicked, a rhythm that steadied her as she watched. The staff. Tom Carter was absent, likely in the dining room, but Lily, the chambermaid, was clearing a table, her movements jerky, her eyes darting to the staff entrance. Miss Marple noted her pallor, the way her hands fumbled with a saucer. Fear, she thought, or a burden too heavy for her slight frame. Lily's nervousness was a contrast to Willis's control, yet both hinted at knowledge unspoken. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead seamstress, whose trembling hands had betrayed her role in a petty theft. Hotels, like villages, were webs of interdependence, and Lily's fear suggested a connection to Willis, to Tom, or to the murder itself. She resolved to speak with the girl later, but for now her focus remained on Willis. Her opportunity came unexpectedly. As she sipped her tea, a commotion erupted in the lobby, audible through the lounge's open doors. A guest's trunk had toppled, scattering clothes across the marble floor, and Willis's voice rose, sharp and commanding, as he directed his team to restore order. Miss Marple rose, her step light, and slipped into the lobby, positioning herself near a pillar to observe. Willis was in his element, his cane a scepter as he barked orders. The bellboys scrambled, their faces flushed, while the guest, a florid man in a pinstriped suit, fumed. Miss Marple watched Willis closely, noting his efficiency but also his tension, the way his eyes flicked to the surrounding guests as if wary of scrutiny. When the mess was cleared, he leaned briefly on the reception desk, his cane resting against the wood. The gesture was fleeting, but it struck her a man with a limp might lean on a cabinet. his cane scraping its surface in haste. She approached him again, her smile apologetic. "Mr. Willis, you handle chaos so well," she said. "I couldn't help overhearing earlier. You must see all sorts of things in a hotel like this. Did Mr. Grayson ever mention enemies? Someone who might have wished him harm?" Willis's eyes hardened, but he answered smoothly. "Mr. Grayson wasn't one for confidences, madam. He was loud, demanding, but I don't pry into guests' affairs. I did my job and left." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing, "but a porter's job takes him everywhere. You might have seen someone near the suite, perhaps, or heard something unusual." Willis's cane tapped once, a sharp sound. "Nothing, madam. I was in and out. If you'll excuse me." He turned away, his limp more pronounced as he moved. To assist a departing guest, Miss Marple watched him go, her mind alight. Willis's reluctance was a wall, but walls had cracks. His presence in the suite, however brief, was a fact, and the scratch on the cabinet was a clue that refused to be dismissed. She thought of the cyanide, its swift brutality, and the decanter, its crystal surface, a silent witness. Someone had tampered with it, exploiting the hotel's rhythms, and Willis's access made him a figure of interest. She returned to the lounge, her tea cold but her thoughts burning. The staff were a constellation of motives: Tom's grudge, Lily's fear, Willis's secrecy. She needed to know more about Willis's movements, his interactions with the others. Hotels, she knew, were like villages, their secrets hidden in plain sight. A porter, with his keys and his cane, was a man who could open doors or close them. To test her suspicions, Miss Marple devised a small experiment. She approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting telegrams. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I've mislaid a brooch in my room. Could you send Mr. Willis to check under the furniture? He seems so thorough." The clerk nodded, making a note. "At once, madame." Miss Marple returned to her room, settling by the window with her knitting. The sea stretched before her, its waves a reminder of time's patient march. She wanted to see Willis in a private setting, to gauge his behavior under scrutiny. When he arrived, his knock was firm, his expression polite but distant. "Looking for a brooch, madam?" he asked, stepping inside, his cane tapping softly. "Yes." "Please," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "Under the armchair, perhaps. It's a small thing, but precious. You must be used to finding lost items in this hotel." Willis nodded, bending awkwardly to check the floor, his cane propped against the chair. "Guests lose all sorts, madame. We do our best to return them." "I'm sure," Miss Marple said, her eyes on him. "It's a responsible job, being head porter. You were in Mr. Grayson's suite that night, weren't you? Such a tragedy. Did you notice the drinks cabinet at all?" Willis straightened, his face impassive. "I told you, madame, I didn't look at the cabinet. I delivered towels and left. I don't meddle in guests' affairs." His voice was steady, but his hand gripped his cane tightly, its tip resting. "On the carpet, of course," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "But a man with your eye for detail might see something others miss. A glass out of place, perhaps, or someone lingering nearby." Willis's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his composure. "Nothing, madame. If there's no brooch, I'll be going." He checked the room cursorily, declared it empty, and left. His limp, pronounced Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting. Paused. Willis's defensiveness was a beacon, his insistence on seeing nothing a shield. She thought of the scratch, the cane, the locked suite. A porter, she suspected, could do more than deliver towels. He could watch, wait, and act. But why? What motive drove a man like Willis, with his pride and his discipline, to risk such a crime? She resolved to share her findings with Bantry at dinner, a plan forming in her mind. The dining room was crowded that evening, the air thick with the scent of roasted duck and claret. As she joined Bantry, she spoke softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. Willis is hiding something, Arthur. His presence in the suite is no coincidence, and the scratch on the cabinet points to him. We must learn his connections to Tom, to Lily, to the hotel's secrets. Bantry nodded, his eyes on his soup. You think he's our man? I think, Miss Marple said, that he's a piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle is nearly complete. We must watch him, Arthur, and listen to what he doesn't say. The truth is close, waiting to be seen. As the meal progressed, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the staff, their movements a silent choreography. The Crown Hotel was a world of mirrors, reflecting wealth and deceit. She thought of Charles Grayson, his life snuffed out by a poisoned sip, and of Eleanor, her freedom hanging on a truth yet to be uncovered. Willis's tale was incomplete, but Miss Marple was patient. She would follow the threads, delicate as her knitting, until the murderer's shadow emerged, sharp and undeniable. Chapter 8. The Waiter's Alibi. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Crown Hotel's dining room, its golden rays filtering through the tall windows and gilding the starched linen tablecloths. Miss Jane Marple sat alone at a small table near the corner, her black dress blending into the room's elegance, her knitting bag resting by her feet. A plate of cucumber sandwiches lay untouched before her, her attention fixed on the ebb and flow of the hotel staff. The clatter of silverware and the soft hum of conversation surrounded her. But her sharp eyes followed Tom Carter, the young waiter whose clash with Charles Grayson had marked him as a figure of interest. Her encounters with Mr. Willis and Lily, combined with her inspection of the crime scene, had tightened the threads of the mystery, and Tom's role his grudge, his tension demanded closer scrutiny. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind sifting through the puzzle. The poisoned brandy, the locked suite, the scratch on the drinks cabinet all pointed to a carefully planned act, and Tom's public humiliation by Grayson gave him a motive as sharp as a blade. She recalled a St. Mary Mead baker's apprentice, whose quiet resentment over a public slight had led to a sabotage of his master's ovens. Tom, with his charm and his debts, was a similar spark, but she needed to know his movements on the night of the murder, his opportunities to act. Her chance came as the dining room began to empty, the luncheon crowd drifting to the lounge or the esplanade. Tom was clearing a table nearby, his movements swift but betraying a nervous energy, his eyes flicking to the staff entrance as if expecting a summons. Miss Marple folded her napkin, her step light as she approached him, her smile as gentle as a grandmother's. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice soft but clear, "might I have a word? I'm Miss Marple, a guest here. I couldn't help noticing your skill in the dining room. It's a demanding job, I imagine, with so many guests." Tom turned, his smile quick but strained, his hands pausing on a stack of plates. "Thank you." "Madam," he said, his tone polished. "It's busy, but I manage." "I'm sure you do," Miss Marple said, her eyes meeting his. "It must be trying, though, dealing with difficult guests. I heard Mr. Grayson was particularly harsh something about a spilled drink, wasn't it?" Tom's smile faltered, a shadow crossing his face before he recovered. "He was particular, madam, but it's part of the job." Guests come and go. His voice was steady, but his fingers tightened on the plates, a faint tremor betraying him. Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone soothing, but such incidents linger, don't they? I understand you were in the dining room the night he died. A busy evening, I expect. Tom's eyes narrowed, a flicker of wariness. Very busy, madam. I was serving all night. Plenty of guests saw me. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the kitchen door. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting bag swinging lightly as she adjusted her shawl. A waiter's work is never done. Did you ever pass by the Graysons' suite that evening, perhaps on an errand? Tom's hand twitched, nearly dropping a plate. No, madame. I stick to the dining room and the kitchens. The suites are for porters and maids. His smile returned, but it was brittle, like glass ready to crack. Thank you, Mr. Carter, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. You've been most helpful. She turned away, her steps slow, but her mind raced. Tom's alibi was firm, yet his unease was palpable, a thread she could not ignore. She needed another perspective, someone who might have seen him stray from his post. Her thoughts turned to Lily, the nervous chambermaid whose fear suggested a connection to the case. Miss Marple made her way to the lounge, a spacious room of velvet and mahogany where the afternoon crowd sipped tea and read newspapers. She chose a table near the staff entrance, her knitting needles clicking as she opened her book. The Vicar of Wakefield, though her eyes were on the room. Lily appeared shortly, pushing a cart of linens, her mousy hair tucked under a cap, her hands trembling as she adjusted a stack of napkins. Miss Marple watched, noting the girl's pallor, the way her eyes darted to Tom as he crossed the lounge. With a tray of glasses, there was a bond there, she sensed, forged in shared secrets or mutual dependence. She recalled a St. Mary Mead housemaid, whose loyalty to a fellow servant had led her to conceal a theft. Hotels, like villages, were webs of alliances, and Lily's nervousness was a clue to the wider pattern. She rose, her step deliberate, and approached the girl, her smile kind. "Lily, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm. "I'm Miss Marple, a guest here. You've such a demanding job, keeping this hotel spotless. It must be hard, with so much to see and hear." Lily started, nearly upsetting her cart, her eyes wide. "Oh, ma'am, I didn't see you. It's busy, yes, but I manage." Her voice was barely a whisper, her hands clutching a napkin. "I'm sure you do," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "You must know everyone here, working so closely with the staff. Mr. Carter, for instance, he's a charming young man. Was he in the dining room all evening when Mr. Grayson died?" Lily's face paled, her fingers twisting the napkin. I think so, ma'am. Tom's always busy, serving guests. I don't keep track of him." Her eyes flicked to the staff entrance, as if seeking escape. "Of course," Miss Marple said, her eyes probing. "But you might have seen him elsewhere, perhaps near the suites. It's a big hotel, and people move about." Lily shook her head, too quickly. "No, ma'am. I was cleaning rooms, nowhere near the dining room. Tom said he needed air that night, took a few minutes outside, but that's all." Her voice trembled, and she bit her lip, as if regretting her words. "Air," Miss Marple repeated, her tone thoughtful. "How refreshing. Thank you, Lily, you've been very kind." She turned away, her mind alight with the girl's slip. Tom had left the dining room, however briefly, and that window of absence was a crack in his alibi, wide enough for opportunity. She returned to her table, Her knitting resumed, but her thoughts racing. Lily's admission was a key, unlocking possibilities. Tom's few minutes outside could have been a detour to the third floor, a moment to tamper with the decanter while Willis delivered towels. The scratch on the cabinet, she thought, could have been made in haste, a tool or a key scraping. The wood. But the cyanide, how had it been obtained, and how placed? She needed more, a link to tie Tom to the act. To test her theory, Miss Marple devised a small plan. She approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting letters, his spectacles glinting. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I'd like Mr. Carter to assist with a tray in my room this evening. He's so efficient, and I've a particular request about the tea service." The clerk nodded, making a note. "I'll arrange it, madam." Miss Marple returned to her room, settling by the window with a view of the sea, its waves a restless mirror to her thoughts. She wanted to observe Tom in a private setting, to press him subtly and watch his reactions. When he arrived that evening, his knock was brisk, his tray balanced with a teapot and scones. His smile was professional, but his eyes were wary, assessing her as he set the tray on the table. "Your tea, madam," he said, his tone smooth. "Anything else?" "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "It's a fine hotel, but I imagine it's hard, working under pressure. Mr. Grayson's death must have been a shock. Were you in the dining room when it happened?" Tom's hand paused on the tray, his smile tightening. "I was, madam, serving guests, as always. It was a busy night." His voice was even, but his eyes flicked to the door, a telltale sign of unease. "Of course, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "But I heard you stepped out for a moment, perhaps for air. It's only natural, needing a break." Tom's face hardened, a flash of anger breaking through. "Who told you that?" "I was in the dining room, madame, the whole time. Guests saw me, the head waiter saw me." His voice rose slightly, then he caught himself, his smile returning. "If there's nothing else, I'll be going." "Thank you," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. "You've been most helpful." She watched him leave, his step quicker, then necessary, and leaned back. Her knitting paused. Tom's denial was too vehement, his alibi too rehearsed. Lily's slip had rattled him, and his reaction confirmed her suspicions. He had left the dining room, and that absence was the key to his involvement. She resolved to share her findings with Colonel Bantry, who joined her for a late supper in the dining room. The room was quieter now, the chandeliers casting a soft glow over the remaining guests. Bantry listened as she recounted her conversations, his fork pausing over his steak. "So, Carter's lying about his alibi," he said, his mustache twitching. "That's something Craddock can use." "Not lying, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice low, but concealing. "He was absent from the dining room, and that absence aligns with the murder. The question is, where did he go, and how did he get the cyanide? We must learn more about his debts, his connections." Bantry nodded, his eyes narrowing. "I'll press Craddock to dig into Carter's background. But what about Willis? You seemed keen on him yesterday." "Willis remains a possibility," Miss Marple said, her eyes drifting to a waiter crossing the room. "His access to the suite is undeniable, and the scratch could point to his cane. But Tom's motive is stronger, his behavior more telling. We must watch them both, Arthur, and see how they interact." As the meal ended, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the staff, their movements a silent choreography. The Crown Hotel was a world of polished surfaces, but beneath, motives simmered Tom's anger. Lily's fear, Willis's secrecy. She thought of the poisoned brandy, the locked suite, the moment of betrayal that ended Grayson's life. The truth was close. She felt like a pattern emerging in her knitting. Its shape clear if one followed the threads. She retired to her room, the sea's whisper following her through the open window. The moon hung low, its light silvering the waves. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, her mind alight with possibilities. Tom Carter was a central figure now, his alibi fraying like a worn seam. She would need to press further, to find the link between his absence and the poison. The case was a tapestry, its threads tangled but forming a picture, and she was determined to see it whole, to clear Eleanor Grayson and unmask the killer hiding in the hotel's shadows. Chapter 9. The Decanters. Secret the morning light over Danimouth was soft. The sea beyond the Crown Hotel, shimmering like a sheet of glass under a pale sky. Miss Jane Marple sat in her room, her black dress neatly pressed, her shawl draped over her shoulders as she gazed at the waves. Her knitting lay untouched on the bedside table, her mind wholly occupied with the puzzle of Charles Grayson's murder. The threads of the case, Lenore's testimony, the scratched cabinet, Tom Carter's frayed alibi, Willis's reticence and Lily's fear were weaving into a pattern, but the heart of the mystery remained elusive. How had the cyanide reached Grayson's brandy? The decanter, she sensed, held the key, its crystal surface a silent witness to a cunning act. Today, she resolved to probe its secrets further, to find the moment when poison met opportunity. She descended to the dining room for breakfast, where Colonel Bantry awaited, his plate piled with bacon and eggs, his newspaper folded beside him. His mustache twitched as he greeted her, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "Morning, Jane," he said, pouring her tea. "You've that look again, like you're about to unravel the Gordian knot. What's the plan?" Miss Marple settled into her chair, her voice low but deliberate. "The decanter, Arthur. It's the pivot of this crime. The police say it was clean, but I suspect it was tampered with before the brandy was poured. We must revisit the suite, examine it again, and I want to press Inspector Craddock on the evidence. Small details, you see, are like stitches miss one, and the whole fabric unravels." Bantry nodded, spearing a piece of bacon. "Craddock's a stickler, but I'll lean on him to let you back in. You really think the decanter's the key, not the glass?" "The glass was the delivery," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "But the decanter was the source. Someone placed the poison there, and the scratch on the cabinet suggests haste, perhaps a forced entry. We must find how and when it was done." After breakfast, Bantry arranged for Inspector Craddock to meet them at the Grayson suite. The inspector, though skeptical of Miss Marple's involvement, had warmed slightly to her persistence, and Bantry's influence as a magistrate smoothed the way. They met in the third-floor corridor, the constable standing guard as before, his face impassive. Craddock, in his neat suit, carried a file of notes, his expression a mix of duty and exasperation. "Miss Marple," he said, unlocking the suite's door, "I've agreed to this, but I warn you, we've combed this room thoroughly. The decanter was clean, the brandy poisoned only in the glass. You're chasing shadows." Miss Marple smiled, her step light as she entered. "Shadows, Inspector, often hide the truth. Let us see what the light reveals." The suite was unchanged, its opulence untouched by the tragedy it had hosted. The damask wallpaper glowed softly, the chandelier sparkled, and the drinks cabinet stood sentinel by the window, its mahogany surface gleaming. Miss Marple approached it at once, her eyes drawn to the scratch she had noted before, faint, jagged mark near the decanter's usual spot. She bent closer, her fingers hovering but not touching, noting its depth, its angle. It was no casual scuff, she thought. It suggested force, perhaps a tool used to pry open the lock. She turned to Craddock, her voice calm but insistent. "Inspector, you tested the decanter for cyanide, but what of its interior? Could a residue remain, too faint for your tests?" Craddock consulted his file, his brow furrowing. The lab was thorough. They swabbed the decanter inside and out. No traces of cyanide, only traces of brandy. The poison was in the glass, Miss Marple and the glass alone. Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind racing. Suppose, she said, the poison was not in the brandy but in the decanter itself, applied earlier and cleaned away after the act. A thin coating, perhaps, that dissolved into the brandy when poured. Craddock's eyes narrowed, his skepticism clear. That's a stretch. The decanter was locked in the cabinet, and Grayson had the key. No one could have tampered with it without being seen. No one, Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. This is a hotel, Inspector. Staff move freely, their presence unremarked. The scratch suggests someone forced the cabinet open, perhaps during a distraction. Craddock shook his head, pointing to the cabinet's lock. It's intact, Miss Marple. No signs of tampering, and the key was with Grayson. Your theory doesn't hold. Miss Marple stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room. The armchair where Grayson had sat faced the sea, its cushions still askew. The low table held the silver cigarette case, its smudges a faint clue she had yet to pursue. She crossed to the window, her eyes on the waves, and let her mind work. The decanter, she thought, was the linchpin. If the poison had been applied earlier, cleaned away before the police arrived, it explained the lack of residue. But who had the opportunity, and how had they evaded notice? She turned to Craddock, her voice thoughtful. Tell me, Inspector, was the decanter examined immediately after the murder, or was there a delay? Craddock checked his notes. The doctor arrived first, confirmed cyanide poisoning. We sealed the room within the hour, but the decanter wasn't tested until the next morning at the lab. Standard procedure. An hour, Miss Marple murmured, her eyes gleaming. And the room was guarded. The constable was posted. Outside, Craddock said, no one entered after Mrs. Grayson was taken away. Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing the scene. Grayson's collapse, Eleanor's screams, the rush of staff and guests. An hour was a lifetime in a busy hotel, a window for a quick hand to wipe the decanter clean. She thought of Tom Carter's absence from the dining room, his few minutes outside, and Willis's brief visit with the towels. Either could have acted, but the decanter's cleaning suggested a second intervention, a cover-up after the fact. She approached the cabinet again, examining the lock closely. It was a simple mechanism, its brass surface unscratched but worn, suggesting frequent use. Inspector, she said, could a skeleton key open this lock? Hotels often have such keys for staff. Craddock frowned, considering. Possible, but unlikely. The cabinet's lock is specific to the suite. Grayson kept the key, and we found no duplicates. Yet locks are not infallible, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. A determined person with access to tools might find a way. The scratch suggests force, perhaps a makeshift tooler knife, a pin. Craddock sighed, his patience thinning. You're building castles in the air, Miss Marple, The evidence points to Mrs. Grayson. She was alone with him. She had motive: his temper, his wealth. Why complicate it? Because, Miss Marple said, her eyes sharp, the truth is rarely simple. Mrs. Grayson's story holds, and the staff's behavior does not. Someone in this hotel planned this murder, and the decanter is their signature. Bantry, who had been silent, cleared his throat. Jane's got a point, Craddock. That scratch isn't nothing. Could be a clue to how the cabinet was opened. Craddock relented, jotting a note. I'll have the lab re-examine the decanter, check for microscopic residues. But I'm telling you, it's clean. Thank you, Inspector, Miss Marple said, her smile serene. She lingered in the suite as Craddock and Bantry stepped into the corridor, her eyes scanning every detail. The room felt heavy, its elegance a mask for betrayal. She pictured the murder, Grayson pouring his brandy, unaware of the poison, Eleanor reading, oblivious, a staff member, Tom Willis, or another slipping in earlier to set the trap. The decanter's secret, she thought, was not in its contents, but in its handling, a moment of cunning hidden in the hotel's daily rhythm. She left the suite, the constable locking the door behind her, and made her way to the lounge, her knitting bag at her side. The room was quiet, a few guests reading, or chatting over tea. She chose a table near the staff entrance, her needles clicking as she opened her book, though her eyes were on the staff. Lily was absent, likely cleaning rooms, but Tom Carter was serving a couple in the corner, his smile bright but his posture tense. Miss Marple noted his quick glances toward the lobby, as if expecting trouble. Her thoughts turned to the cyanide. It was not a common poison, requiring access to chemicals perhaps from the hotel's maintenance stores used for pest control. She recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener who had used rat poison to settle a feud, its theft unnoticed until the damage was done. A waiter like Tom, with his debts and his grudge, might know the hotel's back rooms, its unguarded supplies, but Willis, with his authority, could access such stores without question, his limp no barrier to a determined mind to test her theory. Miss Marple approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting mail. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but clear. "I've noticed a faint smell in my room, perhaps from cleaning supplies. Could someone check the storage areas? Mr. Carter seems so capable. Might he assist?" The clerk nodded, making a note. "I'll arrange it, madam." Miss Marple returned to the lounge, settling with her tea and knitting. She wanted to see Tom's reaction to a task near the hotel's stores, to gauge his familiarity with its hidden corners. When he appeared, dispatched by the clerk, his expression was guarded, his smile less assured. He approached her table, his tray empty. "You asked about a smell, madame," he said, his voice tight. "Yes," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking. "In my room, a chemical scent. I thought you might know the storage areas where such things are kept." Tom's eyes flickered, a flash of unease. "I'm a waiter, madam, not a cleaner. I don't deal with supplies. I'll pass it to the maintenance staff." He bowed and left, his step brisk. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting paused. Tom's discomfort was telling, his denial too quick. She suspected he knew more about the hotel's stores than he admitted, perhaps from scavenging for quick cash or worse. The cyanide, she thought, was the missing link, and Tom's accessor, Willis's, was the key to its source. She shared her findings with Bantry over luncheon, the dining room bustling with guests. Bantry listened, his fork pausing over his shepherd's pie. "You're closing in, Jane," he said, his eyes narrowing. Carter's rattled, and that decanter theory's clever. What about Willis? Willis is still a possibility, Miss Marple said, her voice low. His access and his cane fit the scratch, but Tom's motive is stronger, his absence from the dining room a critical gap. We must learn where the cyanide came from, Arthur. A hotel has many secrets, and its stores are a likely hiding place. Bantry nodded, his expression grim. I'll press Craddock to check the maintenance rooms, see if anything's missing. But if the decanter was cleaned, how do we prove it? By watching, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. The killer will betray themselves, Arthur. A guilty hand returns to the scene to check their work. We must be ready. As the meal ended, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the staff, their movements a silent ballet. The Crown Hotel was a world of mirrors, reflecting wealth and deceit, but its shadows held the truth. She thought of the decanter, its secret buried in a moment of cunning, and of Eleanor Grayson. Her freedom hanging on a thread, Miss Marple was determined to follow. The case was a tapestry, its pattern emerging, and she would not rest until the killer's face was clear, etched in the light of justice. Chapter 10. A trap set. The twilight over Dannemouth draped the Crown Hotel in a soft violet haze, its grand facade glowing faintly under the gaslights that lined the esplanade. Inside, the lobby hummed with the subdued energy of evening guests. In evening dress drifting toward the dining room, bellboys gliding with polished efficiency, and the faint strains of a violin quartet floating from the lounge. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual armchair near a potted palm, her black dress blending into the shadows, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm that belied the intensity of her thoughts. The murder of Charles Grayson was a puzzle nearing completion, its pieces Eleanor's innocence, the scratched cabinet, Tom Carter's absence, Willis's reticence, and the decanter's secret forming a pattern she could almost grasp. Tonight, she resolved to set a trap, to coax the killer into revealing themselves through the subtle pressure of a well-placed rumor. Her morning had been spent in quiet observation, her conversations with Colonel Bantry and Inspector Craddock sharpening her focus. Tom Carter, with his grudge and his fleeting absence from the dining room, was her primary suspect, his motive rooted in Grayson's public humiliation and his debts a spur to desperate action. Yet Mr. Willis, the head porter, lingered in her mind, his access to the suite and the possibility of his cane causing the cabinet's scratch, making him a shadow she could not dismiss. Lily's fear hinted at a broader conspiracy, but it was Tom's tension, his frayed alibi, that pointed to guilt. The cyanide, she suspected, had been stolen from the hotel's maintenance stores, and the decanter had been tampered with before Grayson poured his fatal drink. To prove it, she needed the killer to betray themselves, and a trap was the surest way. She had shared her plan with Bantry over luncheon, her voice low as they sat in the dining room, the clatter of cutlery masking their words. We must unsettle the guilty party, Arthur, she said, her eyes gleaming. A rumor carefully spread that new evidence has been found about the decanter. If Timor Willis is our man, they'll act, perhaps return to the suite to ensure their tracks are covered. We must watch, and Craddock must be ready. Bantry, his fork pausing over a slice of lamb, had nodded, his moustache twitching. Clever. Jane, like dangling bait for a fish. But how do we spread this rumor without tipping our hand? Discreetly, Miss Marple said, her tone calm but firm. You'll speak to Craddock, ask him to mention it casually to the staff, perhaps. In the kitchen, where gossip travels fast. I'll do my part in the lounge, dropping a word to the right ears. The killer will hear, and guilt will do the rest. Bantry had agreed, his admiration for her guile evident. You're a marvel, Jane. I'll get Craddock on board. What's debate? Exactly. A hint, Miss Marple said, that the police have found a trace of cyanide residue in the decanter, missed in the initial tests. It's plausible enough to alarm the guilty, but vague enough to avoid suspicion. We'll see who bites. Now, in the lobby, Miss Marple prepared to play her part. She rose, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, and made her way to the lounge. A spacious room of velvet drapes and polished wood, where the evening crowd was gathering. The violin quartet played a gentle waltz, its notes mingling with the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation. She chose a table near the staff entrance, ordering a glass of warm milk of choice that drew a curious glance from the waiter. Not Tom Carter. Her needles resumed their dance, a perfect disguise as she scanned the room. The lounge was a microcosm of Danemouth's elite, a retired colonel pontificating about the war, a young heiress laughing over champagne, a solicitor scribbling notes in a leather-bound book. But Miss Marple's focus was on the staff. Lily was clearing a table, her hands trembling as she stacked plates, her eyes darting to the staff entrance. Mr. Willis stood near the door, his cane tapping softly, his posture rigid as he oversaw. The bellboy was Tom Carter was serving a group of businessmen in the corner, his smile bright but his movements tense, as if braced for a blow. Miss Marple waited, her patience a honed tool. Her chance came when a guest, a chatty widow in a feathered hat, approached her table, drawn by the sight of her knitting. "What a lovely scarf," the woman said, her voice carrying. "You must have such patience." "Thank you," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "It's a small pleasure, keeping the hands busy. Though I confess, it's hard to focus with all this talk of the murder. I heard the police found something new in the Grayson suite, a trace of poison in the decanter, they say." The widow's eyes widened, her fan pausing. "Really? I thought it was all settled, Mrs. Grayson, wasn't it?" "So they thought," Miss Marple said, her voice low but clear, designed to carry just far enough. "But new evidence changes things. The police are looking closely at the staff now, I hear." The widow gasped, leaning closer. "The staff? How dreadful. I'll have to tell my friends." She bustled off, her voice already rising as she shared the tidbit with a nearby group. Miss Marple's needles clicked, her eyes flicking to Tom Carter. He was pouring wine, but his head turned slightly, his ear catching the widow's words. His smile faltered, his hand trembling as he set down the bottle. He glanced toward Lily, who was wiping a table nearby, and their eyes met briefly, a silent exchange that Miss Marple noted with interest. The rumour had landed, and Tom's reaction was a spark in the tinder of her suspicions. She turned her attention to Willis, who was speaking to a bellboy near the entrance. His posture was unchanged, but his eyes darted toward the lounge, as if sensing a shift in the air. Miss Marple wondered if he, too, had heard the whisper, carried by the hotel's invisible currents of gossip. She needed to ensure the rumour reached the staff's inner circles, where it would do the most good. To that end, she approached the reception desk, where the clerk was sorting telegrams, his spectacles glinting under the chandelier. "Excuse me," she said, her voice frail but deliberate. "I've heard the most unsettling news about the Grayson case, something about new evidence in the decanter. Could you ask the manager to reassure the guests? It's causing quite a stir." The clerk blinked, his pen pausing. "New evidence, madam. I hadn't heard." "I'll pass it along." He made a note, his curiosity piqued, and Miss Marple knew the rumour would soon reach the kitchen, the porter's room, the maid's quarters, wherever the staff gathered to whisper. She returned to her table, her milk untouched, her knitting a steady rhythm. The lounge grew livelier, the violin quartet shifting to a livelier tune, but Miss Marple's focus remained on the staff. Tom was now clearing a table, his movements jerky, his eyes flicking to the staff entrance as if planning an escape. Lily, polishing a brass lamp, was paler than ever, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her cloth. Willis, still at the entrance, leaned on his cane, his gaze sweeping the room with a new intensity. Miss Marple's trap was set, the rumour spreading like ripples in a pond. She had asked Bantry to ensure Craddock stationed a constable near the Grayson suite, ready to catch anyone attempting to tamper with the scene. Now she needed only to wait, to watch the guilty betray themselves. She thought of a St. Mary Mead poacher, caught when he returned to check his snares, his guilt outweighing his caution. Murderers, she knew, were no different, drawn back to their crimes by fear of discovery. As the evening deepened, Miss Marple moved to the lobby, settling in her armchair near the potted palm. The space was quieter now, the dining room crowd thinning, the bellboys less frantic. She opened her book, The Vicar of Wakefield, but her eyes were on the staircase, the lift, the corridors leading to the suites. She pictured the killer, hearing the rumour, their pulse quickening as they imagined a trace of cyanide betraying them. Would it be Tom, slipping away from the dining room? Willis, using his authority to access the suite? Or another, hidden in the hotel's shadows? Her vigil was rewarded near midnight, when the lobby was nearly deserted, the chandelier dimmed to a soft glow. She saw Tom Carter emerge from the staff entrance, his uniform slightly askew, his face pale. He glanced around, his eyes darting to the staircase, then moved swiftly toward the lift. Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart quickening. She rose, her steps silent, and signalled a nearby constable who had been briefed by Craddock. The constable nodded, slipping into the shadows to follow. Miss Marple remained in the lobby, her knitting resumed, her eyes on the lift's indicator. It stopped at the 3rd floor, where the Grayson suite lay. She waited, her patience a steel thread, knowing Craddock's men were watching. Minutes passed, the lobby silent save for the distant crash of waves. Then a commotion erupted, raised voices, the clatter of footsteps. The lift descended, and Craddock appeared, his face grim, the constable at his side, holding Tom Carter by the arm. Bantry joined her, his eyes wide. "Jane, you were right." They caught Carter in the suite, wiping down the drinks cabinet. "He's denying everything, but Craddock's taking him in." Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind racing. Guilty men, Arthur, always return to tidy their mistakes. Tom's panic betrays him, but we must hear his story. The decanter's secret is close to being revealed. They followed Craddock to the magistrate's office, a short drive through the darkened streets. Tom sat in a stark room, his hands cuffed, his charm replaced by a sullen defiance. Craddock stood before him, his notebook open, his voice sharp. "You were caught red-handed, Carter, wiping the cabinet, trying to erase evidence, were you?" Tom's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the floor. "I wasn't erasing anything. I heard talk about new evidence, thought I'd check the suite. I didn't kill him." Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle but piercing. "Mr. Carter, you left the dining room that night, didn't you? For a few minutes, as Lily said. Where did you go?" Tom's head snapped up, his eyes flashing. Lily, she's got no business talking. I stepped out for air, that's all. I was back before anyone noticed. But you weren't, Miss Marple said, her eyes unyielding. You went to the suite, didn't you? While Mr. Willis delivered towels, you slipped in, tampered with the decanter. You hated Mr. Grayson for what he did to you and your debts. Made you desperate. Tom's face crumpled, his defiance cracking. I hated him, all right, he muttered. He humiliated me, made me a laughingstock, and yes, I'm in debt cards, bad bets. But I didn't kill him, I swear it. Craddock leaned in, his voice hard. Then why were you in the suite tonight? Tom hesitated, his eyes darting. I panicked. Heard the police found something in the decanter. I thought maybe I'd touched it, left a mark. I just wanted to be sure. Miss Marple. Lips pursed, her mind sifting his words. Tom's panic was genuine, but his story was incomplete, a half-truth woven to protect himself for another. She thought of Lily's fear, Willis's reserve. The trap had snared Tom, but the full truth remained just out of reach. She turned to Craddock, her voice calm. Inspector, search the maintenance stores for cyanide. Tom may have had access, or someone else did, and question Lily again. She knows more than she's said. Craddock nodded, his skepticism softened by her precision. We'll do it, Miss Marple. Carter's not going anywhere. Miss Marple and Bantry returned to the hotel, the night air cool against their faces. The lobby was silent now, the gaslights flickering. She settled in her room, the sea's whisper a soothing counterpoint to her thoughts. The trap had worked, exposing Tom's guilt, but the case was not closed. The decanter's secret was near, its truth hidden in the hotel's shadows. She thought of Eleanor Grayson, her freedom closer but not yet won, and of the killer, there, mask slipping under the weight of her trap. The pattern was clear now, its final stitches within reach. And Miss Marple would not rest until the tapestry was complete, the murderer revealed in the light of justice. Chapter 11. The confession. The dawn light crept over Dannemouth, painting the sea in delicate shades of pink and silver, its gentle waves whispering against the shore. Inside the Crown Hotel, the grandeur of its marble lobby was softened by the early hour, the chandeliers dim and the air hushed save for the occasional step of a night porter. Miss Jane Marple sat in her room, her black dress exchanged for a soft grey shawl, her knitting untouched on the bedside table. The events of the previous night, Tom Carter's capture in the Grayson suite, his panicked attempt to wipe the drinks cabinet, had brought the murder case to a critical juncture. Yet the truth, like a half-finished tapestry, remained incomplete, its final threads tantalizingly out of reach. Tom's guilt seemed certain, but his denials and Lily's fear suggested a deeper layer, a secret yet to be unraveled. Miss Marple's trap had worked, the rumor of new evidence in the decanter drawing Tom like a moth to a flame. His presence in the suite, caught by Inspector Craddock's constable, was damning. Yet his story panic over a possible fingerprint, not murder, rang with a note of desperation that gave her pause. She thought of a St. Mary Mead carpenter, caught stealing tools but shielding a friend's greater crime. Tom, she suspected, was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. The cyanide's source, the decanter's tampering, and the roles of Willis and Lily needed clarity, and she resolved to press forward, to extract the confession that would free Eleanor Grayson and expose the killer. She descended to the dining room for an early breakfast, where Colonel Bantry awaited, his face etched with excitement and fatigue. His newspaper lay folded, his coffee steaming as he greeted her. "Jane, you've done it again," he said, his mustache quivering. "Carter's in custody and Craddock's buzzing like a hornet. But he says the lad's still denying murder. What's your take?" Miss Marple settled into her chair, accepting a cup of tea, her voice calm but resolute. "Tom is guilty of something, Arthur, but his fear suggests he's not alone. His attempt to clean the cabinet was a reaction to our rumor, but his story of checking for prints is too convenient. We must question him closely, and Lily Touchy's hiding something, perhaps out of loyalty or coercion. The truth is near, but it requires one final push." Bantry nodded, buttering his toast. "Craddock's set to interrogate Carter this morning at the magistrate's office. Wants you there. Says your questions rattled the lad last night. And he's searching the maintenance stores for cyanide, per your suggestion." "Good," Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming. "The cyanide is key. A hotel's stores are a treasure trove for a desperate soul, and Tom's debts or Willis's. Authority could have opened that door. We must also learn what Lily knows. Her fear is a beacon, Arthur, pointing to the heart of this crime." After breakfast, they drove to the magistrate's office, a stern stone building bathed in the mornings. Soft light. The air inside was cool, tinged with the scent of wax and old paper. Craddock met them in a narrow corridor, his suit crisp but his eyes tired, his notebook tucked under his arm. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone a mix of respect and exasperation. "Carter's in the interrogation room. He's sticking to his stories as he panicked about fingerprints, nothing more. But we found a vial missing from the maintenance stores, cyanide-based pest control. No prints, but it's a start." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her mind racing. "A missing vial," she murmured. "And who had access to those stores? Inspector staff?" "Mostly," Craddock said. "Porters, cleaners, maintenance crew. Carter could have slipped in, or Willissey oversees the porters, has keys to most areas. We're questioning the lot." "Excellent," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let us speak with Mr. Carter. His fear will betray him, and we must press where he falters." They entered a stark room, its walls bare, save for a single window casting pale light on a wooden table. Tom Carter sat slumped in a chair, his hands cuffed, his boyish charm replaced by a sullen defiance. His uniform was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes darted to the door as they entered. Craddock took a seat opposite. Bantry stood by. The wall, and Miss Marple settled into a chair slightly to the side, her knitting bag at her feet, her presence deceptively mild. "Carter," Craddock began, his voice sharp, "you were caught wiping the drinks cabinet in the Grayson suite. You claim it was about fingerprints, but we know you left the dining room the night Grayson died. Where did you go, and what did you do?" Tom's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the table. "I told you, I stepped out for air. 5 minutes. Maybe I was back before anyone missed me. I didn't go near the suite, and I didn't kill him." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but piercing. "Mr. Carter, you hated Charles Grayson. He humiliated you in front of a crowded dining room, called you a fool. And your debt's gambling, wasn't it? Pressed you hard. A man in your position might see a way out, a chance to strike back. Did you take it?" Tom's head snapped up, his eyes flashing. "I hated him, all right. He made my life hell, and I owed money, still do. But I'm no killer. I didn't touch that decanter, I swear. Then why the suite?" Craddock pressed, his pen poised. "Why wipe the cabinet if you're innocent?" Tom's hands clenched, his voice trembling. I heard the talk new evidence, cyanide in the decanter. I thought, maybe I'd brushed against it, serving in the dining room. I couldn't risk being blamed. I panicked, that's all. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, her mind sifting. His words, his fear was genuine, but his story was a patchwork, stitched with half-truths. She thought of the cyanide vial, the scratched cabinet, the moment of opportunity when Willis delivered towels. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone gentle but relentless, "you know more than you're saying. Lily told me you left the dining room, and I believe you went to the suite. Perhaps you didn't act alone. Was someone else involved? Mr. Willis, perhaps, or Lily herself." Tom's face paled, his breath catching. "Lily, she's got nothing to do with this. She's just a kid, scared of her own shadow. And Willis's a tyrant, but he's no murderer. Leave them out of it." Craddock leaned in, his voice hard. "Then give us the truth, Carter, or you'll swing for this. The cyanide came from the hotel stores. Did you take it?" Tom's eyes widened, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "I didn't take anything. I don't know about any cyanide. You've got to believe me." Miss Marple sat back, her knitting bag untouched, her mind racing. Tom's defense of Lily was telling. A loyalty that hinted at a bond perhaps romantic, perhaps coerced. She thought of a St. Mary Mead shopgirl who had lied to protect a lover, her fear outweighing her honesty. Tom's panic suggested he was shielding someone or something, but his denial of the cyanide was too vehement. A wall she needed to breach. "Inspector," she said, her voice calm, "might we speak with Lily? She knows something, and her fear may loosen her tongue. Mr. Carter's reaction confirms it." Craddock nodded, signaling the constable to fetch the chambermaid. They waited in tense silence. Tom's head bowed, his hands trembling. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the decanter, its secret a pivot in the crime. The cyanide, she suspected, had been applied in a thin coating, dissolved into the brandy, and cleaned away before the police tested it. Tom's absence from the dining room aligned with Willis's visit, a distraction that allowed a quick act. But Lily's role witness, accomplice, or pawn remained unclear. Lily arrived, her slight frame dwarfed by the room's severity, her mousy hair tucked under a cap, her eyes red-rimmed. She clutched her apron, her voice barely audible as Craddock addressed her. "Lily, you told Miss Marple that Tom left the dining room the night Mr. Grayson died. Where did he go, and what do you know about the cyanide?" Lily's hands twisted, her apron, her gaze darting to Tom, who shook his head slightly, a silent plea. I don't know, sir," she whispered. "Tom said he needed air, that's all. I didn't see him go anywhere." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "Lily, my dear, you're frightened, and I understand. But the truth will free an innocent woman. You care for Tom, don't you? Tell us what happened, and we can help him." Lily's eyes filled with tears, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to say anything. Tom's good to me, looks out for me. He was so angry at Mr. Grayson, always talking about getting even. That night, he slipped away, said he had to do something quick. I thought he was just cooling off, but he came back shaky, wouldn't talk about it." Tom's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. "Lily, stop. You don't know what you're saying." Craddock's eyes narrowed, his pen scratching furiously. "Go on, Lily. What did he do?" Lily sobbed, her words tumbling out. "I saw him later, near the maintenance room. He was holding something, a small bottle, like the ones they use for pests. I asked him about it, but he told me to keep quiet. Said it was nothing. I was scared, sir, but I didn't think he'd kill anyone. Miss Marple's heart quickened, the pieces falling into place. She turned to Tom, her voice gentle but unyielding. Mr. Carter, you took the cyanide, didn't you? You slipped into the suite while Mr. Willis was there, used his presence as cover, and coated the decanter with poison. You wanted Grayson to suffer, but you didn't expect it to be so swift. Tom's face crumpled, his defiance shattering. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he sobbed, his voice raw. Grayson was a monster, humiliated me, made me feel worthless. I was drowning in debt, couldn't see a way out. I thought, a little poison, just to make him sick, to scare him. I stole the cyanide from the stores, used a maintenance key I'd nicked. When Willis went to the suite with the towels, I followed, slipped in while Grayson was yelling at him. I brushed the decanter's rim with the stuff, quick as I could. I didn't think it'd kill him so fast. Craddock's pen stopped, his voice grim. You poisoned a man, Carter. That's murder, whether you meant it or not. Tom's head bowed, tears falling. I didn't want him dead, I swear. I cleaned the decanter after, when I heard he was gone. I was scared, thought I'd covered it. But when I heard about new evidence, I had to check the cabinet, make sure I hadn't left anything. Miss Marple sat back, her expression serene but her mind alight. Tom's confession was the keystone, locking the puzzle's pieces into place. The scratch on the cabinet, she realized, was likely from his hurried use of the stolen key, not Willis's cane. Lily's fear stemmed from her loyalty to Tom, her silence a shield for his crime. Willis, though suspicious, was innocent, his presence a mere coincidence exploited by Tom's cunning. Eleanor Grayson, Miss Marple said, her voice soft, is innocent, Inspector. Tom acted alone, driven by hate and desperation. The cyanide's source is confirmed, and the decanter's secret is revealed. Craddock nodded, his skepticism replaced by grudging admiration. You've done it, Miss Marple. We'll charge. Carter, release Mrs. Grayson. I'll need statements from you and Lily. Lily, still sobbing, was led away, her relief tempered by guilt. Tom was taken to a cell, his defiance gone, his future a shadow. Miss Marple and Bantry left the office, the morning sun warm on their faces. The drive back to the hotel was silent, Bantry's awe evident in his glance. You're a wonder, Jane, he said as they reached the lobby. Carter never stood a chance. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. Hate, Arthur, is a heavy burden, and it betrays itself in time. Tom carried it too long, and it broke him. Now, I think a cup of tea is in order. They moved to the lounge, the sea sparkling beyond the windows. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Eleanor, soon to be free, and to the hotel, its secrets laid bare. The case was solved, its tapestry complete, but she knew the world held more puzzles, waiting for her patient hand to unravel them. For now, she sipped her tea, the rhythm of the waves a quiet echo of her triumph. Chapter 12. The resolution. The morning sun rose over Dannymoth, bathing the Crown Hotel in a golden light that softened its grand Edwardian facade. The sea beyond sparkled with a serene brilliance, its waves rolling gently against the shore, as if whispering the town's secrets back to the horizon. Inside the hotel, the lobby was a quiet hum of activity guests checking out. Porters moving luggage with practiced ease, and the faint clink of breakfast trays echoing from the dining room. Miss Jane Marple stood at her room's window, her black dress exchanged for a soft grey suit, her shawl draped lightly over her shoulders. Her knitting bag rested on the bed, its contents untouched, for her mind was wholly occupied with the resolution of Charles Grayson's murder. Tom Carter's confession had unraveled the mystery, freeing Eleanor Grayson and exposing the dark currents of resentment that had poisoned the hotel's polished surface. Yet, as always, Miss Marple knew the final threads of any case required. Careful tying, lest they fray and unravel, she descended to the dining room, where Colonel Bantry awaited, his face a mix of relief and admiration as he rose to greet her. His tweed suit was slightly rumpled, his moustache bristling with the energy of a man who had witnessed a triumph. A plate of scrambled eggs and toast sat before him, steam rising from a cup of coffee. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," he said, pulling out her chair. "Carter's in custody, Eleanor Grayson's to be released this morning, and Craddock's practically singing your praises. How do you do it?" Miss Marple smiled, settling into her seat and accepting a cup of tea from a waiter not Tom Carter, whose absence was a stark reminder of the night's events. "It's no great mystery, Arthur," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "People are the same everywhere, whether in a village or a grand hotel. They carry their grudges, their fears, their secrets, and those secrets leave traces, like footprints in a garden. I simply follow them." Bantry chuckled, spreading butter on his toast. "You make it sound so simple, but I've seen Scotland Yard men stumped by less. Carter's confession, good Lord. Jane, you had him pegged from the start." "Not from the start," Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling, "but the pieces fell into place. Tom's resentment, his debts, his absence from the dining room, they were all threads in the same tapestry. The decanter was the key, and his panic betrayed him. I only regret poor Lily's distressed. She cared for him, you know, and that loyalty nearly broke her." Bantry nodded, his expression sobering. "She's a nervous little thing. Craddock says she's given a full statement, backs up Carter's story. The cyanide came from the maintenance stores, just as you thought. Carter nicked a vial, used a stolen key to slip into the suite while Willis was there. Thought he'd just make Grayson ill, not kill him. Foolish boy, foolish, but human," Miss Marple said, sipping her tea. "Hate is a heavy burden, Arthur, and it clouds the mind. Tom's pride was wounded, his debts a noose. He saw a chance to strike back, but he didn't foresee the consequences. Few do." Their conversation paused as the waiter brought Miss Marple's breakfast, modest poached egg and toast, perfectly suited to her unassuming tastes. The dining room was lively, its chandeliers catching the morning light. But Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the staff, their movements subdued. A new waiter served a nearby table, his manner cautious, as if the hotel itself mourned the breach of its harmony. She thought of Lily, now free of her secret but burdened by betrayal, and of Mr. Willis, whose stern authority had been incidental to the crime. His cane innocent of the cabinet's scratch, Bantry leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, Grayson's coming to the hotel this afternoon. Jane wants to thank you herself. Craddock says she's shaken but grateful. Poor woman's been through the ringer." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes softening. "She's endured much, Arthur. A husband's cruelty, a false accusation, is a heavy load for one so young. I'll be glad to see her, to know she's free." After breakfast, Miss Marple returned to the lobby, her knitting bag at her side, her step light but purposeful. The space was a whirl of activity guests, departing for the train station. Porters hauling trunks, the clerk scribbling at the reception desk. She settled into her familiar armchair near a potted fern, her needles clicking as she opened her book, The Vicar of Wakefield, though her eyes were on the hotel's pulse. The resolution of the case had restored order, but she knew the ripples of such a crime lingered. Like echoes in a quiet room, her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Craddock, who approached with a brisk stride, his suit impeccable, but his expression weary. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "I owe you an apology. I thought you were chasing fancies, but you've cracked this case wide open. Carter's confessed everything motive means, the lot. We've got the maintenance key he used, and the vial's wrapper was found in a bin near the stores. It's airtight." Miss Marple smiled, her needles pausing. "You're too kind, Inspector. You and your men did the hard work. I only pointed to the path. Have you spoken with Lily?" Craddock nodded, pulling a chair closer. "She's a wreck, poor girl. Says she suspected Tom was up to something, but didn't believe he'd go so far. She's confirmed his movements, saw him near the maintenance room that night, holding the vial. Kept quiet out of fear, thought he'd just scare Grayson. She's no accomplice, just a frightened witness." "Poor child," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. "Loyalty is a noble thing, but it can bind us to the wrong cause. And Mr. Willis?" Cleared, Craddock said. His visit to the suite was routine, just the towels. The scratch on the cabinet was Carter's doing, from the stolen key. "Willis is gruff, but he's clean." Miss Marple nodded, her mind picturing the suite, the decanter, the moment of betrayal. Tom's confession had clarified the mechanics of the crime, the stolen cyanide, the quick brush of poison on the decanter's rim, the cleaning afterward to hide his tracks. The scratch, she realized, was the mark of his haste, a slip in his otherwise careful plan. She thought of a St. Mary Mead grocer whose theft of sugar had been betrayed by a smudge on a ledger, a small detail that unraveled his scheme. Hotels, like villages, were unforgiving of such oversights. "I'm glad it's resolved," she said, her eyes meeting Craddock's. "Eleanor Grayson can begin again, and the hotel can heal. But tell me, Inspector, how did Tom access the maintenance stores? Was security so lax?" Craddock's jaw tightened, a flicker of embarrassment. "The stores were locked, but the key was kept in a cupboard in the porter's room. Carter worked there as a bellboy before he was a waiter, knew where to look. Slipped in during a quiet moment, took the vial. We're tightening things up. Now, can't have that happening again." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "A hotel is a trusting place, but trust invites betrayal. You've done well, Inspector." Craddock stood, his expression softening. "Couldn't have done it without you, Miss Marple. If you're ever in Danimouth again, the station's doors are open." He tipped his hat and left, his stride brisker than before. Miss Marple remained. In the lobby, her knitting resumed, her thoughts drifting to Eleanor Grayson. The young woman's ordeal had been harrowing, her innocence nearly lost to the weight of circumstance. Miss Marple pictured her in the suite, reading by the window, as her husband poured his fatal drink, unaware of the poison lurking in the decanter. The image was poignant, a reminder of the fragility of trust, and she looked forward to meeting her, to offer what comfort she could. The afternoon brought Eleanor to the hotel, as Bantry had promised. She arrived in the lounge, where Miss Marple was sipping tea, her knitting bag at her side. Eleanor was pale, her auburn hair pinned loosely, her grey dress hanging on a frame thinned by strain. Yet her hazel eyes held a spark of resilience, a quiet strength that Miss Marple recognized from her own village, where women endured hardship with unspoken grace. Miss Marple, Eleanor said, her voice steady but soft. Colonel Bantry said, "You were the one who proved my innocence. I don't know how to thank you." Miss Marple rose, her smile warm. "My dear, no thanks are needed. The truth was there, waiting to be found. I'm only sorry for your loss, and for what you've endured." Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "Charles was difficult, but I never wished him dead. To be accused, to think I'd lose everything, it was a nightmare. You've given me my life back." Miss Marple took her hand, her touch gentle. "You're young, Mrs. Grayson, and you have time to rebuild. The hotel is a place of shadows, but the light finds its way. Go forward and let the past rest." Eleanor nodded, a tear escaping, and thanked her again before leaving, her step lighter than when she'd arrived. Miss Marple watched her go, her heart warmed by the sight of justice served, though tempered by the knowledge of Tom's downfall. A young man broken by his own choices. She returned to her table, her tea cooling as she reflected. The Crown Hotel, with its marble and crystal, was a microcosm of human nature, its elegance a veneer over the passions beneath. Tom's grudge, born of humiliation and debt, had led to a fatal act, his attempt to cover it undone by his own fear. Lily's loyalty, Willis's discipline, the hotel's rhythms all had played their part. But it was the decanter's secret, exposed by her trap, that had revealed the truth. Bantry joined her for a final tea, his expression one of unabashed. "Jane, you're a marvel," he said, stirring sugar into his cup. "The town's talking about nothing else. Selenor's release, Carter's arrest. You've turned the Crown upside down." Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking. "A hotel is just a village with better wallpaper, Arthur. The same motives, the same mistakes. I only listened, watched, and followed the threads." Bantry chuckled, shaking his head. "You make it sound like a parlour game, but I know better. What's next for you? Back to St. Mary Mead?" "Yes," Miss Marple said, her eyes drifting. "To the sea, the evening train. My roses need tending, and my nephew will expect his scarf. But I'll carry this case with me, Arthur. Every puzzle teaches us something new about the heart." They finished their tea, the lounge emptying as the afternoon waned. Miss Marple packed her suitcase, her movements precise, and took a final walk through the lobby, its grandeur now familiar, its secrets laid bare. The staff moved with renewed caution, their glances wary, as if the hotel itself had learned a lesson. She thought of Tom, his youth lost to a moment of rage, and of Eleanor, her future reclaimed. The balance of justice, she knew, was delicate, but it held. At the station, Bantry saw her off, his handshake firm. "Come back any time, Jane," he said. "Danamoth could use more of your sharp eyes." Miss Marple smiled, boarding the train. "The world is full of puzzles, Arthur. I'll find them wherever I go." The train pulled away, the sea fading into the dusk, and Miss Marple settled into her seat, her knitting bag at her side. She opened it, her needles resuming their dance, but her mind was already wandering, seeking the next loose thread, the next pattern waiting to be woven. The Crown Hotel had been a stage, its drama resolved, but the world, she knew, was a tapestry of stories, each waiting for her patient hand to unravel its truth.